We are live.
Good day, everyone. On the eve of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which will be held in Kigali between the 20th and the 25th of June this year, journalists, authors, academics, and other experts from various Commonwealth countries are coming together in this virtual conference to discuss and share the experts' views and the relationship between Rwanda and the most important Commonwealth values at the time when Rwanda will begin to chair the organization for the next 2 years. As the spotlights are on Rwanda right now for that event, we ask ourselves this question: do the member states of the Commonwealth really care about its values? So to start our conference, I will now introduce to you Mr. Valentin Akayesu, who's the facilitator of the first panel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, my brother. I'm happy to join you on this platform and talk about the situation of Rwanda regarding this coming summit of CHOGM in Rwanda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Valentin. And now you can take the microphone and present your panel members. The microphone is yours.
Yeah, thank you again. As you said, my name is Valentin Akayesu Muhumuza. I currently live in the Netherlands. Yeah, of course, originally from Rwanda. I have a professional background of law. I have practiced law in Rwanda as a judge and later a trainer in a school of law. I have also emerged in a human rights work in Rwanda. I was a member of some organization in Rwanda, like the Organization for Human Rights in Action in Rwanda. And unfortunately, the organization is no longer working because, as you know, the situation in Rwanda is not favorable for the work of human rights organization. So briefly, that is me. Yeah, I don't know whether Freddie, I can say more about.
Thank you for your presentation. Now you can now introduce to the first panelist, and we'll go on with the discussions. Thank you.
Okay. The first panelist is Mr. Phil Taylor from Canada. Phil Taylor is a Canadian and veteran broadcaster with many years' experiences in media experience on radio. Taylor is the host of the Taylor Report on CIUT 895 FM on the University of Toronto. For many years, his CIUT Taylor Report was the only North American broadcast outlet giving voice to dissident Rwandans and ICTR defense attorneys. He is also laureate of 2018 Victor Ingabire Umuhoza Democracy and Peace Prize Award. Mr. Taylor, we are happy to have you on this platform.
Thank you. By the way, I'm to speak for 10. Is it 10 minutes approximately? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we do hear you.
I believe it was. I just want to make sure I didn't over talk too long because this is a topic I think a lot about. I worked at the International Criminal Tribunal, of course, from the opening, and I think I learned things there that apply to this question of the values of the Commonwealth, which is coming together in Kigali, of all places. I suppose, I'm afraid I look at it with great skepticism and the word would be displeasure, I believe that the situation of Rwanda, as I speak of it from Toronto, Canada, the biggest question is, does the Commonwealth ever consistently have any values? Because, in my opinion, the West is a culprit in the terrible tragedy that struck Rwanda in 1994. That the West, particularly the capitals of New York and London, later Paris, contributed mightily to what occurred there. When I see this event going on now with the Commonwealth, to me, it's another victory lap for Paul Kagame, another anointing, further support for his regime, just as the awarding of the presidency of the Francophonie to, of all people, a member of his government, one who mocked the assassination in South Africa of one of the leading voices criticizing his government. The woman publicly laughed at the death of the man, he was murdered. So here they are. They've permitted Rwanda to be the head of the Francophonie, and this is a government which, when it came into power, made English the official language of the country, disrupting the culture, creating mayhem in the education system, just to score points against France. And France became so subdued that they now turn around and reward President Kagame. And today we have, of course, the Commonwealth awarding him. And this is a pattern. And so I think that the question I have is, why isn't the West, major states, why don't they live up to their word? They never keep their word. They had a responsibility in the tragedy, because we had a civil war, so-called. It was always misidentified, in my opinion, and this is from many years working at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. The first fact that the West has completely ignored and has always been repressed, but which was very evident to myself and others when we tried to understand, was that the media have portrayed Paul Kagame as a Rwandan rebel and a guerrilla leader. I remember reading it in the New York Times. And in the middle of a long article explaining who he was, the New York Times said he had been a general in the Ugandan army. When I read that, I said, well, the story is not that he is fighting today in Rwanda, but the story is that he's a Ugandan general. The troops he is leading, or at that time, 1993, when I read the article, the troops were Ugandans. They were many Rwandan origin, I suppose, in nationality, but they were part of the Ugandan army. So the West failure begins right there, because why wasn't that the main issue? Why wasn't it raised with Uganda immediately by London, Washington, Ottawa? What is this Ugandan?
Mr. Taylor, can I allow me a little bit to stop? Because we will back on this statement you are making. You have questions to ask you, and I think you will elaborate well on the questions. So maybe allow me to continue with other speakers just to introduce them.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then, no problem.
I thought we were beginning. I'll begin again another time. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Let me continue with Abraham Mutai. Abraham Tai, are you on microphone, I think? Mr. Abraham Tai.
Yes, yes.
You are a Kenyan digital and political strategist.
Yes, yes.
You have been very known figure, political commentator in Kenya and East Africa, and a defender of freedom of speech. You have
Yes.
you are also known as a champion of the use of social media as platform to use for responsible freedom of speech and to
Yes.
hold authorities accountable. You have over 500,000 followers on Twitter, which is incredible. And you have also committed on Rwanda freedom of speech and the media and got attacked that we will talk about in this conference. Yeah, I do have to remember you are also the awardee also of Ingabire Prize, Ingabire Prize. So, something to say in 1 minute?
Okay, that's quite a good introduction. I hope my audio is good. My audio is good. Valentin, my audio is okay?
Yes, yes, I do hear you.
Thank you so much. Basically, what I can say in this 1 minute is that the theme. I mean, what we are talking about today, the topic of this what we are talking about today, Commonwealth coming to Rwanda. For me, I have seen it. I see it from an angle of people in government being in business with other people in other governments. I can say. Because I have never understood and I've never seen if we have serious good values that are actually propagated by the Commonwealth and actually they are entrenched in Rwanda, because what Rwanda is, especially to the media, is really something different when it comes to what Rwanda is on the ground. And for some of us who are always engaged and following events in Rwanda, we get a little bit annoyed and sometimes dismayed when we see the media are actually participating together with the government of Rwanda in distorting facts and projecting a different image that does not exist on the ground. So it is a very interesting conversation, and I was very happy to be invited to participate in it. And I wish these kind of conversations we can have them across Africa and have people participate in them, because they are eye-opening and it's key for us to talk about this, especially when we talk about what are some of those values that we could be seeing for the Commonwealth that we don't actually see in Rwanda. If we talk about democracy, is there democracy in Rwanda? I mean, so I think it's going to be a very important conversation. Thank you very much,
Yes.
Valentin.
Okay, thank you. Nice. Nixon Katembo from South Africa. Are you with us?
Me? Yes, I'm with you.
Yes, how are you, Nixon?
Certainly fine. If I can be on this platform, I think that means I'm still alive, and thank you for the opportunity for being here. As a person in the media who has been following events in the Great Lakes region, personally as a person who comes from northeastern DRC in the Ituri province, and having suffered at the hands of rebel invasions and the subsequent creation of proxy militia in my own country of origin, the DRC. This platform is very closer to my heart, especially looking at the Commonwealth principles that is set out in the Commonwealth Charter. There are about 16 of them, but one touches me is the Charter number 3, the principle number 3, which talks about international peace and security, and whether Rwanda fits into this category of being known as propagating peace and security, while it is participating in a protracted war and wars of invasion since 1996 up until today in Eastern Congo, and creating militia groups under the name that they are Congolese group, but actually in real essence, they are militia that are funded and armed as well as supported by the government of Rwanda to actually feed into the narrative of economic miracle that the Rwandan government has done. And one who should not miss our words in talking about it, that this is a government of run like a mafia type of government, of which the general vehicle of this mafia is a Crystal Ventures, which is the economic wing of the Rwandese Patriotic Front. So that is the question that where we lie, and I think going forward in this discussion, I hope that we expand on them in greater details. Thank you.
Thank you, Nixon. I first inform our audience the person who you are, because I have not put it. So let me do it right now. Nixon is a political and current affairs journalist and reporter based in South Africa. Nixon appeared on various South Africa television outlets, particularly CABC, sharing his expert commentary on conflict and political dynamics in the Great Lakes region of Africa, including Rwanda. In South Africa, is known within the media sector as the man to go to for information and expertise related to the region. Thank you again, Mr. Nixon. So let me call Dr. Anjan Sundaram. Dr. Sundaram, great to have you.
Thank you, Valentine. And
okay.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I do hear you. Let me first introduce you to our audience. Yeah, of course, I know many Rwandans who follow the development of media and the human rights, of course, know you, but it's better to recall who you are for the other people who don't know you. Dr. Ajan is an award-winning journalist who has reported from Africa and the Middle East for the New York Times and Associated Press. His writings have also appeared on the Washington Post and Los Angeles Times, The Guardian, Huffington Post, and many others. In 2006, Anjan received the Reuters Journalism Award for his reporting on Pygmy tribes of Congo's rainforest. 2009, Anjan Sundaram began a journalist training program in Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. After his training, almost every reporter he instructed was arrested or forced to leave the country, caught in tightening web of strict media control. In his book, Bad News, The Last Journalist in the Dictatorship, Anjan offers an incredible first-hand look on the rise of dictatorship and the fall of the free speech. One that is important to understand, not just for his implication in Rwanda, but for any country threatened by demand to adopt a single way of thinking. Thank you, Anjan. In 2 minutes, something to say? Your microphone, please. Maybe on people who are in techniques. Do you hear us? Dr. Anjan? Anjan, you are on mute, I think. You can unmute. Yeah, while Dr. Anjan is arranging his microphone, let me give a throw to Mr. Noel and continue presenting other speakers. Mr. Noel? Mr. Noel?
Hello.
Hello, Mr.
Hello.
Noel.
Thank you, Valentin. Thank you for
Okay.
all those introductions. And actually, before we get to Noel, I would like to have some words with our panelists, because we do have some questions to ask to the panelists. I'll probably start by Phil Taylor. Phil Taylor, as a Canadian, what do you think will benefit for Rwanda by becoming a member of the Commonwealth? Do you think it is well placed? Do you think Rwanda is well placed to become the chair of the Commonwealth, the position that requires to promote and inspire member states such as Canada in implementing Commonwealth values, including democracy, human rights, freedom of media, and so on? What do you think about it?
Well, I think that you have to turn the world upside down to understand Canada. The idea that Rwanda has less respect for human rights than Canada. Canada participated in establishing Mr. Kagame in power. They've worked very hard. They've made life miserable for many people. Many Rwandans have been transferred out of Canada to Mr. Kagame's regime long after organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch all said this is not a place that anybody ought to be transferred to. There is no justice there. They coordinated. So in a sense, I have to say they're brothers, because they have been providing help, support for the Kagame government. And I think it's, in a way, it's they're making matters rather, I'd say, nakedly obvious. I would say one thing, and I noticed someone asked a question, a good one, which is that another one, which is that what should Trudeau do? I would ask him to have public hearings by the Parliament into the conduct of various Canadians who played a role in 1994, starting with General Dallaire, because the Belgians did it. The Belgians wanted to know what happened, and their parliament met on the subject. And France had more than one. I think that would be a good start. But as for the Commonwealth, they're just continuing the process of aiding and abetting Paul Kagame.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Thank you very much. And Mr. Mutai, as a Kenyan, I know that you have used your social media expertise to comment on Rwanda issues. What was your experience at that time in interacting with Rwandans? And is it different from your Kenyan audience, or you find it being the same?
My experience is actually it's not the same. It's not the same. I find it a little bit different, because the issues we are facing in Kenya are a little bit different from the issues in Rwanda. For instance, there in Kenya, we do have freedom of expression. We have freedom of speech. We speak freely. We support whoever we want. There is a well-established political environment. We have people in the opposition. We have almost 150 political parties in Kenya. And the situation is totally different in Rwanda, where we find that most of the time, the situations there are actually, people are conditioned to think and act almost the same way. And when you act differently, right from the top, from the government top down, they will actually come down very hard on you. And I find this, and I find it a bit weird and strange that even citizens of Rwanda who are on social media are actually aiding the government in doing this narrative. For instance, when I started speaking about issues in Rwanda, and I was so much fascinated by the musician who was actually murdered and assassinated. I was fascinated by his way of thought and what he was fighting for. During that time, when I was speaking about that, the Rwandan government reached out, the ambassador here in Kenya. Of course, I think he was, of course, sent, of course, by the government in Rwanda. He reached out, and the kind of narrative that the kind of tweets and posts I was making, they really didn't. The government of Rwanda didn't want me to go that route. What they really wanted is me to, to speak mostly about the government-sanctioned narrative of what really happened in 1994. So that government-sanctioned narrative is what they always want everybody to speak about. And when you speak contrary to that government-sanctioned narrative, you find that there are so many, I believe, so many Rwandan people who are on social media, and probably they are paid by the government to always come and attack me. They've always attacked me. They've called me names. They say I'm being paid by NGOs. They've said I'm being paid by people in Europe to smear or attack the government of Rwanda. But these are facts. These are issues. These are facts. And both sides of the divide during 1994, they committed crimes. And you cannot just say one side committed a crime while the other did not commit a crime. So it is a fact. It is a fact. People died from both sides. And in Rwanda, speaking about that is a little bit difficult because people come down very hard on you. I was actually blacklisted from ever traveling to Kigali. I don't know if my name has been removed from the blacklist, but so far I was informed by the Kenyan government that I should never travel to for my security. I should never travel to Rwanda. And it was during this time the Rwandan government reached out asking me to. They actually were going to sponsor me to travel to Rwanda, and they thought that they needed to re-educate me on what I really know about what happened in 1994. So they say that they're gonna show me around. They're gonna show me, educate me what happened there, and basically for them they wanted me to understand the official government narrative.
Okay.
So
thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mutai. Now I will give back the microphone to my friend Valentin to continue on. Thank you. You are on mute, Valentin. You are on mute.
Dr. Sundala. Dr. Anjan, I hope you are on microphone.
Sorry, now. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Let me ask you a question about the development of journalism in Rwanda. You know you are expert in this field, and you have a very specific knowledge about the situation of journalists in Rwanda. So there is a CHOGM, this summit that will be held in Kigali in coming days. And we all know Commonwealth is based on different values, among others, promoting peace, dialogue, freedom of media. So what the assessment do you make about the progress of media in Rwanda, mostly after you have worked on the field in Rwanda? What assessment you can do today about the development of journalism in Rwanda?
So thank you, Valentin. My book was about the demise and destruction of free speech in Rwanda in 2010, around the 2010 presidential elections, and in the years subsequent. And since I left Rwanda over the past several years, I think the clearest indicator that free speech is even more under threat and even more restricted is that in 2010, Kagame won the presidential election with 93% of the vote. And in 2017, he won with almost 99% of the vote. I think that's a very clear statistical indicator that repression has been increased. Free speech is tighter. And in my opinion, keeping in touch with journalists and the media situation, it's gotten more and more, it's gotten worse and worse over time. It's become tighter as Kagame has felt more and more under threat and concentrated power in the presidential office increasingly. I think the Commonwealth process has been compromised since the beginning. I remember when I was in Rwanda, they were conducting a human rights evaluation, and the Human Rights Commissioner, I believe that's the term, of the Commonwealth, pointed out many of the human rights violations in Rwanda and recommended that those be addressed before Commonwealth membership was granted to Rwanda. And that wasn't the case. And so it was a political decision. And I think this Commonwealth summit, in not allowing journalists, critical journalists such as myself and many of my colleagues, to attend and to report on the event, is going to become just another whitewashing event where, foreign leaders are going to come to Kigali and be able to say whatever they want, be able to speak freely, which is a right that is not granted to many Rwandan journalists, academics, politicians, NGO workers, civil society members. Many of them have been killed for speaking freely. And so I think it is a tragedy that the Commonwealth leaders will get this impression that they can come to Rwanda and speak freely and live freely, when that is not the case for many, many Rwandans who are critical of President Kagame.
Do you think Rwandan journalists can expect something from the Rwandan membership of Commonwealth?
My own feeling about this is, I think this is drawn from my own experience trying to help and assist journalists who were under fire from the Rwandan government while they were doing the reporting. My own feeling is that many of the Commonwealth nations have presidents, prime ministers, political leaders. They also have parliaments. And I think if a link can be made between journalists, Rwandan journalists, and members of parliament who can speak up for them when they are under threat, I think that can be quite a useful tool and a positive way of using the Commonwealth membership to defend Commonwealth values and to help Rwandan journalists, perform their work in a safe manner. Because I do believe many of these countries have parliament members who are committed to Commonwealth values to a degree that maybe prime ministers and presidents are not so committed, being political leaders and more interested in political deals and and presenting themselves at these forums. So I think there are negative sides, but there are problems, as I mentioned before, with the Commonwealth membership. But I think there are opportunities also that haven't been fully utilized to help not only journalists in Rwanda but civil society members, activists. Because what I should say that I wrote this book about Rwandan journalists, some of whom were killed for criticizing Kagame. But it is amazing how year after year, brave Rwandan journalists and activists keep rising, keep coming up to criticize President Kagame and his government, despite the risks, despite seeing what has happened to their colleagues. And so there are always new waves of people, and I think not enough is done to protect them, and there are opportunities to do that.
Okay,
thank you.
You talked about opportunities for being member of Commonwealth. So for Rwandan journalists who will listen to you, who will listen this broadcast, so what opportunities are you telling to them? So what opportunities of being member of Commonwealth Wealth Organization for Rwandan journalists. Can you a little bit elaborate on that?
I think your question is very important, and it's very tricky to answer because many of Rwandan journalists many of their liaisons with the outside world, with foreign countries, happens through embassies. And embassy officers are often political appointees, and in my experience are very unsympathetic to the cause of free speech in Rwanda and even fundamental human rights. Many of them are critical of Rwandan journalists and human rights organizations. And so it can be very difficult for journalists and activists to go through the embassies to members of parliament. I would encourage Rwandan journalists, and obviously I know they're under fire doing a very difficult job already. But I'm sure there are many nonprofits, NGOs that are coming to the Commonwealth Summit as third members. And there are international organizations like Reporters Without Borders and Community to Protect Journalists. I think these represent the rights of journalists around the world and can be effective go-betweens to reach members of parliament and maybe have more effective protection while they do their work. So yes, again, it's a very complex situation. As has been pointed out before, President Kagame has so much support in the international community. And I'd like to just make one little point that I think critical of this support, but I think it's also worth understanding it. President Kagame is he's very good at in his speeches at channeling a lot of historical racism and a lot of historical media narratives that undermined Africa and Africans. And President Kagame, like many leaders like Modi in India and Erdogan in Turkey, they use this historical sense of humiliation, and they present themselves as a solution, as a new generation of leaders who are building countries that are proud of their histories, don't need to depend on the West. And so this narrative is very seductive. So I understand that in the international community and among many Africans as well, leaders like Paul Kagame are a breath of fresh air, and a lot of people support them. What I think is important, and the work we're doing here, is that these grand speeches are concealing neo-totalitarian states, very, very powerful, repressive states, dictatorships in effect. And I think that is a problem.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Anja. Mr. Nixon Katembo, you are you are expert in conflict assessment, strategic assessment. So you know about our situation going on in the region of Great Lakes of Africa, and you know also about this, I may say, a new development, cooperation development in the security domain between Rwanda and some countries in Southern Africa. So how do you assess Rwanda involvement in Mozambique? And there are other different security cooperation with different countries in that region, like Angola, we have seen that, Malawi, Lesotho. I don't know what about South Africa. So how do you evaluate this kind of security cooperation between Rwanda and some countries in southern part of Africa? Your microphone, I think.
Okay. I think it is important to underscore the point that these security cooperations are meant only for one thing, to sanitize the regime in Kigali as a one contributing factor to international peace and security in the eyes of the public opinion. But once, if you analyze deep those security cooperation, you would understand that these are self-serving security cooperation that seeks to actually serve a certain interest. I will begin with the one with Mozambique. You would recall that Total had invested about $2 billion in a liquefied natural gas in Mozambique, which was threatened by the insurgency of the Islamic State in Cabo Delgado, and therefore they were forced to leave. But you know, it goes back to the point of my colleague in Canada said that you know, they brought in Louise Mushikiwabo to chair the Francophonie and so on. Through that is when the French government approached Kigali to actually assist in sort of a rent the soldier type of approach to send the soldier in Mozambique. So that is in a framework within which Rwandan soldiers are in Mozambique. On the other parts of the United Nations and so on, namely, this is more of a way of conducting some covert operational type of gathering intelligence on other Rwandan who have fled the country in a way, in many respects. But to say that the military cooperation have an engagement in a way that they contribute positively in an aspect of, or in the eyes of those who do not understand the dynamics and the political interest that, as well as the economic interest that comes with those military cooperation, you would say that it's a positive point, which one cannot take away from the Rwandan government in contributing troops to the United Nations missions in the South Sudan, as well as in Mali. You will recall that General Karenzi Karaka was there, and places like in Somalia, of course. But coming to the security question in the Great Lakes region, and lately what is happening, for example, in the DRC, where just of last night, President Tshisekedi writing to British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, you'd see that this an ongoing continuation of what has been happening in Eastern DRC. And perhaps if the Commonwealth value around international peace and security can be entrenched among members, then one would say that Rwanda does not qualify in any case in taking part or even hosting the Commonwealth itself, given its role of destabilizing factor within the Great Lakes region. And I should mention that this is not just only about the Eastern DRC. Burundi have a similar problem, although the Burundians have stand firm against the bully that has come from Kigali by supporting the likes of General Niyombare and the likes of Hussein Rajab to mount a coup in Burundi against the late President Pierre Nkurunziza. So going to Kigali at the moment when all these aspects of security and general destabilization of the Great Lakes region at large, I don't think that it really espoused to this particular value of international peace and security in the Commonwealth Charter is all about. And I think it's not up to the Commonwealth members to figure out whether this is worth it to do. I say this because, as I said earlier, that it is more of a trade than the real value that the Commonwealth espouses. Is you look at it in a way that the British have signed agreements to ship asylum seekers in Rwanda, and we know the price tag that have been signed between the British government and the Rwandan government. But the key question that is not being asked is that what happened to the previous similar agreement that have been signed by the Rwandan government and other states like Denmark and Sweden, which signed similar agreement, as well as Israel. And has there been an assessment of the progress of migrants who came from those countries and sent back to Rwanda? And was the manual signed between, or cooperation signed between Rwanda and those countries worth the paper on which it was signed? And these are key critical questions, I think, that the Commonwealth have to be asking itself in having Rwanda at its helm. I cannot help it but insist on the question of the DRC, where the evidence presented to the peace and security mechanism of the International Conference on the Great Lakes region, showing clearly Rwanda's invasion of the DRC, the capture of a soldier, the type of armament that the so-called rebel M23 are using, which are directly linked to the Rwandan government. So these are key critical questions that one need to ask going forward. And if you ask me whether Rwanda is espousing those values, I think the answer seems to be in the negative, the way I see from the perspective of someone who has been watching the event unfold in the Great Lakes region. And in essence, those military cooperation, coming back to the main question here, is that they are geared just to bolster Kagame's image in outside the world, not necessarily without looking at the issues of the security in the Great Lakes region as well as East Africa. And unfortunately, even other Commonwealth members within the East African region, such as Uganda and Kenya, as well as Tanzania, they are well aware of this, but they are not even taking the leadership to make sure that they rein in on their own neighbor in a way they have been handling the peace and security in the Great Lakes region, let alone the issue of Congo alone, because, you know, for the issue of Congo, there have been an argument that we are fighting for Rwandophone-speaking people in Eastern DRC. One begs the question, for how long this narrative can go on? We know for the fact that it was the very same narrative that was driven in 1996 when Congo was first invaded. The same happened in 1998. As well as in the images of the CNDP of Laurent Gbagbo in 2005. Then you have the images of the M23 in 2012. So it's really begs the question to ask, if you talk about international peace and security in the Charter of the Commonwealth, what does really the Commonwealth in general stand for? If you can admit a member and then a member being at the helm of your organization in defending the very same principle that the very member is violating.
Mr. Nixon, just on that, how do you see the fate of refugees in that region of Southern Africa? Because you know there are many Rwandan refugees in Mozambique, in Malawi, in Zambia, and in other different countries. So how do you see their fate in regard of this security cooperation agreement between Rwanda and those countries? So as long as we know that refugees there in those countries are threatened, we have seen many being kidnapped, others killed, others their properties being confiscated. So how is their fate in the views of the government of those countries?
I think, you know, Rwanda, it's no secret that it spares nothing to quell any opposition or any critical view or opinion from within and beyond its borders. That is point number one that we should bear in mind in these discussions. And even the fact that we are coming on this platform might be a security to our own personal life. I mean, that is and there is no doubt about that. If you ask me about the security cooperation between the Southern African countries and the government of Rwanda, it's geared towards actually not having a genuine security threat that's coming from these countries towards Rwanda, but rather making sure that there is a covert operation against most of these refugees who are seen to be prospering in those countries, making their own lives and continuing without hindrance. And clearly, it seems to me that the Rwandan government does not want any refugee, especially who does not toe the line of government, to carry on with their lives. And you talked about those who have been kidnapped in Mozambique. You talked about those who are being killed in various Southern African countries. And you recall the attempt on Kayumba Nyamwasa here in Johannesburg, the killing of Patrick Karegeya, which has been talked about. But there are many others who are dying in silence, who perhaps whose name might not be known to the public and might be not influential. And the very same agreements that are signed by this government is the one that facilitates military attachés to actually send in people who are spies in nature, or even snipers who just go on and attack these refugees. And that's the danger of those military cooperation. Now, we recall that there was recently an agreement signed between the government of Lesotho on security cooperation in terms of security training. And one wonder, what is the aim for? It's because the South African government stood firm against the Rwandan government to committing atrocity on its own territory. And therefore,
Mr. Nixon, let's give a throw to other speakers before we finish the first part of our intervention. I want to come back to Mr. Phil Taylor. Phil Taylor, as a Canadian citizen, what do you think Canada, what kind of influence Canada could exercise on Rwanda as a Commonwealth member country? So do you think there is something Canada can do just to support the development of human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of press? So what do you think about that? Do you see anything the government of Canada can do in this sense?
I think the government of Canada needs to act on its rhetoric. Some more appropriate reaction to news, such as that once again Rwanda is sending troops for the third, fourth, fifth time into Congo. Canada should say firmly, we don't believe they should be there. If they continue to be there, we don't want to be part of any organization with them. If they were to say that, eyes would open up in Kigali. But everybody uses, I'm sorry to say, within the Commonwealth, my impression is they all have mastered the language of, we are deeply concerned. This seems, this is a troubling bit of information. We're going to look into that. We're going to have conversations. When in fact, they're working very closely with people who are committing serious crimes domestically and against their neighbors.
Thank you. Thank you, C. Mr. Mutai, you are a Kenyan citizen. Kenyan is in democracy, has much more advanced in terms of democracy, and human rights respect in that region. So what do you think Kenya, as a member of East African Community, as a member of Commonwealth Organization, as also a friend and a partner of Rwanda, what Kenya can contribute to help to support Rwandan effort, the Rwandan citizens' effort to promote democracy and human rights in Rwanda? Your microphone.
Thank you. I will answer that one. Then also I'll answer another question I've seen on our chat here. I think there's a lot that Kenya can do to support citizens in Rwanda. And one of those best efforts is actually to support the citizens who are living in Nairobi. I do know a big group of citizens of Rwanda who live in Nairobi. The government of Kenya can also support them in terms of providing asylum or providing a place where they can transit into other countries where they are looking for asylum or actually trying to move away from Rwanda. And also we also do have Rwandan refugees who live in Kenya. I believe that the Kenyan government can increase support to these refugees by also giving some of them resident status where they can still work within the country. I know a very large group of Rwandan citizens who have been given work permits. They live here comfortably and they go about their businesses without much hindrance. So I think as much as sovereignty and statehood is concerned, there's little that Kenyan government can do, apart from just supporting the citizens who come here. I think that is as far as the government can do. But looking at this question here about whether Rwanda actually is the best East African country to convey the Commonwealth values, I believe it is not. In fact, it's the worst example that we can ever have. If the Rwandan president hunts and kills his opponents and political critics across Africa, the Rwandan president kills his own people who actually dare criticize him within his own country. The Rwandan government invades another country, invades Rwanda, and they shoot at protesters. So the Rwandan government shoots protesters who are refugees who are just protesting. So I don't believe those are the values that Commonwealth actually is propagating. And if those are the values, then Commonwealth is nothing but a club of a few people who are actually trying to uplift a certain hegemony. And as someone, there's someone who said here, one of the panelists, that Commonwealth really, when you look at it at the bottom line, it is all about the United Kingdom. Is about the United Kingdom furthering their own agenda. So if we are going to say that Rwanda is the best example, and that's why, despite the human rights abuses, despite the fact that the Rwandan president has refused even to leave power, he thinks he's the only person who can lead Rwanda, and without him, Rwanda can never exist. Despite all these things, and they have been captured all over. Despite all that, the Commonwealth are actually taking the conference to Kigali. So you wonder what is it that the Commonwealth are actually are preaching or are propagating? Those values. Rwanda is the exact opposite of the values that Commonwealth will want be propagated. And in fact, Kenya is the best country that is doing so much better than most of the East African countries. In Kenya, we have the democracy. We have people speaking. We have critiques. We don't kill. In fact, we rarely, the people in power rarely kill those who criticize them. And here in Kenya, we still have political parties, and we have presidents who come and go. But if you compare that to Uganda, you compare that to Burundi, you compare that to Rwanda, I mean, Kenya should have been even the best country to host this conference. Kenya, we don't invade. We have not invaded any other country. In fact, we are sending troops to DRC to help them. We as a government of Kenya, Kenya sent Kenyan technocrats to South Sudan to teach that government on how to run a government. Kenya, we have troops in Somalia helping them to stabilize their own government. So basically, we are doing much more. If we talk about values in terms of democracy and human rights, Kenya, we are doing much more better than Rwanda, and we are the best placed to actually hold this conference. And in any case, if we talk about why Rwanda is being given that chance, for me, it's all about business. And these are people who are just trying to, they are doing business. I mean, they will talk about human rights, but when it comes to this kind of questions, they close their eyes. I mean, they behave as if it's not happening, but actually, in the real sense, it's happening. So yes, I believe Rwanda is not the best example here, and it is just it's an insult. In fact, it's an insult to us to have this kind of a conference going to Rwanda, despite all the human rights, despite all the killings, despite everything that is happening in Rwanda.
Exactly, it's a shame to Commonwealth. Yeah, I think that is the understandable thing we can say about it. So thank you, panelists. I now return back microphone to Mr. Freddy, and just to he can let us to go in the second part of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Freddy, your microphone.
Sorry. Thank you, everyone, for participating in this panel. And we wish we had more time to discuss, because there are so many things to discuss about. But as we still have 2 more panels to follow, so we will go on and with the next panels. But before we do that, I would like to on my own perspective, listening to all of you, it gives me the feeling that with Rwanda being the next chair of the Commonwealth, we'll have so many things going on. We'll have probably to watch closely. So Rwanda will not lead that Commonwealth organization as it does, as President Kagame does in his own country. And that being said, I will go on and pass the microphone to my friend Noel Zihabamwe for the next panel. Thank you very much. Noel, are you there?
Freddy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you once again, Freddy. Let me start by welcoming again all panelists who are joining us today to discuss, of course, about the upcoming CHOGM meeting in Kigali. So my name is Noel Zahamwe. I'm an Australian citizen of the Rwandan origin. I'm a human rights advocate at the Australian Human Rights Institute here in Sydney. The institute breaks silos based on academics, research, and all the problems to progress human rights issues, not only in Asia and Pacific, also around the world. Today's, of course, topic is, do the values of the Commonwealth values and principles mean anything to member states? Focusing on all spotlights on Rwandans. So I'm honored to be one of the facilitators today, especially at this very special program. And so today I'm privileged to be joined by different experts, from around the world, including human rights activists, journalists, authors, academics, and politicians, who are going to share with us their expertise or experiences or views on the relationship of Rwanda with the Commonwealth as Rwanda prepares to host this special or this important event. So joining me today, I want to start by welcoming Dr. Barry Collins.
Hello there. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So let me start by introducing you to our audience, Dr. Barry. So Dr. Barry Collins is a UK-based writer and researcher. He has researched in various areas related to Rwanda, including the genocide and human rights. Some of his writing and views have been found to be of course, contraventions by some commentators and academics. On the other hand, he was also credited with the most tightly argued, well-documented, and provocative challenge to the conventional wisdom. Among his publications include New Wars and World Wars, The Lessons of Rwanda, Rethinking Human Rights, Critical Approaches to International Politics, so published by Palgrave Macmillan in the UK. Welcome, Barry. So our next panelist is Panda Charlo Evans Mwema, joining us from Zambia. Miss Evans, a very warm welcome. Can you hear?
I'm glad to be part of the panel.
Okay, let me make some very brief introduction about you. I know you have your own time to tell us who you are. We already very pleased to have you. So Mwema is a Zambian journalist specialized in political commentary and reporting. So he has written in various Zambian-based leading newspapers, including the Zambian Observer, the Daily Nation of Zambia, and others. His particular interest is in monitoring the democratic process and people participation. He's currently editor-in-chief at Woodpeckers Digest. Thank you. Our next panelist is Benedict Moran from Canada. Welcome, Benedict. Pleasure to have you. You're on mute.
Not on mute. Let me take my earbuds off.
Okay, good. Thank you. So let me also give you a brief introduction about Benedict. So Benedict Moran is an award-winning journalist and an independent filmmaker. He has directed, reported, and produced for The Guardian, PBS Frontline, The New Yorker, News Hours, Al Jazeera, Vice News, and the Christian Science Monitor, and Foreign Policy, National Public Radio, CBS News, Public Radio International, France 24, and others. He was a silver medal winner in 2019 for the Ricardo Ortega Memorial Prize and gold medal winner in 2015 of the Elizabeth Neva Memorial Prize for Written Media from the United Nations Correspondence Associations. So welcome to our panel. Last but not least is Dr. Richard Capende from UK. Dr. Richard Capende from UK.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Welcome, Dr. Richard.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. So, Dr. Richard Capende is he's a lecturer in criminology and quantitative research methods, Institute of Criminal Justice Studies at the University of Portsmouth. He holds a PhD in social statistics, an MS in demography, and BSc in criminology and psychological studies. Dr. Capende's research interest focuses on criminal justice and population dynamics in post-conflict countries, applying statistical techniques to explore patterns and links between socio-demographic characteristics and crime. The demography of armed conflict and violence constitute the main research topic for Richard's PhD thesis, where he assessed the extent and the scope of excess population loss associated with 1998 and 2024 armed conflict in the DRC Congo. Thank you so much to have you all, and we are pleased to be with you today. I know here in Australia, it's nearly midnight. So I know like Canada, it's morning time, then the UK, it's daytime, same as in Africa. So going back to, starting with now with Dr. Barry Collins. I have a few questions and I'll be going one by one. Dr. Baron Collins, what is your view on current Rwandan governance and human rights situation? Do you think Commonwealth membership will make a difference?
Well, I don't think it's changed at all since Kagame took power in '94. I think that it's, it's one of Africa's most brutal dictatorships, and has been enabled to remain that way because of the sustained support from most of the United States, Britain, and other Western countries. And I think, our task here is to expose this and to show really that this Commonwealth meeting is a demonstration of contempt for the people of Rwanda and for the electorates of all the Western leaders that they are supposed to represent, because they know the record of Kagame and his government, because they've been part of his own narrative. They have sustained his narrative, supported him. Britain to date has given £1.3 billion in aid to Kagame's government. And, it's no surprise that Kigali is now going to host the Commonwealth. And, if you have a situation where death squads are apprehended in places like London or in other areas where citizens are told that their lives are in danger from the Rwandan government, but they're told by the very same government that is now continues to aid that government that's sending the death squads, then you have to ask, well, what's the point of, asking about the values of these people and their organizations? I think our task really is to put them on the spot and to demand, I think, as Phil Taylor earlier suggested, that we have more inquiries into this that are public and ask more about, the role that Britain has had in creating and sustaining this dictatorship in Rwanda.
So this should be a platform where many people, especially Rwandans who've been abused, whose the human rights have been violated. This was going to be a platform where people can raise the awareness of those issues. But it seems like especially the Western countries, yes, they understand, but they end up doing nothing. So what can Rwandans or the friends of Rwandans do in this context?
Well, I think we need to do more of this. We need to connect more with each other, and we need to expose, as I say, the linkages that exist that sustain this, unbelievable violation of rights. And there are many ways we can do it. We're not a totalitarian society, thankfully. We have certain freedoms that enable us to do this. But we are up against a very severe cancel culture. And I know this from personal experience across Britain. And but that doesn't stop us and shouldn't stop us from telling the truth and exposing the linkages that we're talking about.
So going back to Panda Charlo Evans from Zambia, what the view of Rwandan governance or as a country that most of Zambians have? So we see people sympathizing. There's a clean city. There's a visionary person. So what's Zambian views on this?
Thank you so much. I'm one person who bought into the Rwandese public propaganda. I've written wonderful articles about Paul Kagame and his. I'm one person who, at the same time, listens to reason, and I've come to learn over time that actually the propaganda works very well in Rwanda, and a lot of Zambians have been opening in Rwanda. But as an independent, as a freelance journalist, personally, I'm trying so hard to make actually people's truth. It's very difficult to go back because the truth defines the reality. I think at this moment, a lot of Zambians know that things are not okay in Rwanda. Because you see, we have a lot of Rwandese who are running shops here in Zambia. And I remember one time when I was arrested for my objective reporting, sorry to say, I met a lot of Rwandese while I was in detention, and they did nothing wrong. But they were being persecuted here in Zambia because of their views. So some of them were journalists, some of them were political activists, and they were supposed to be deported back to Rwanda. And I think this of the majority Zambians, and I feel that it is really high time a forum like what you have prepared is really aired so that a lot more people come to know the truth about Rwanda.
But many people see Rwanda, of course, as an example. While you, as a journalist, independent journalist, you say something different. And many refugees from Rwandan background who reside or live in Zambia have experienced those atrocities, where even some attempted assassinations have been actually conducted. So in the eyes of politicians, what are their views on these issues?
I feel that, democracy in Africa has failed us in one area, in the sense that we've failed to distinguish between the concept of multi-party democracy and democracy itself. I struggle to explain this to people. When you make a person feel happy by giving them money or giving them t-shirt or giving them, I don't know, whatever they are looking for, they feel you are a good leader. You don't go down to the real issues of what democracy actually means and why we should be advocating for democracy. Politicians, I'll try and make it very simple for the viewers to understand this. If you have someone in the opposition here in Zambia who might gain political advantage by associating himself with Paul Kagame, he would never say anything bad about Paul Kagame. So this is not about what people of Rwanda need or the people of Zambia need. It's more about what I want as a politician. And I think this is one thing that we're trying so hard right now to explain to people, the greater majority of our people, what is it that the people need? What is it that we are trying to achieve as a country, as an ordinary child on the streets of Lusaka, as an ordinary man? We remain a people.
Thank you. As a country, Zambia as a member of Commonwealth, we come back later on to you to see what the Zambia as a country or as a member of Commonwealth, community can do. So let's go now to Canada, to Benedict Moran. In your upcoming film, The Man of the Year, I understand that you'll be attempt to expose how the current Rwandan leadership has manipulated and bend the world's most powerful people and organizations to their will, successfully getting them to adopt this false narrative and turning a blind eye to their repressive. Don't you think that the upcoming Commonwealth conference will be a good platform and an opportunity for, let's say, for the president to, or for you to paint an amazing image and continue to manipulate the world, as you put it?
Hi, can you hear me? I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me. Great. Yeah, the current Commonwealth Summit is a great opportunity on both sides. Primarily, it's an opportunity for the Rwandan government to once again use an international platform to legitimize itself in the eyes of Rwandans, in the eyes of Africans, in the eyes of, most importantly, Western leaders. I believe that the stage of politics is most important, not in Rwanda. Rwandans know full well what the RPF is, what Paul Kagame is. They've been living under him since 1994. But what the narrative fundamentally needs to be changed in foreign capitals. Why do I say this? It's because, like many of your guests have insinuated, the story of Paul Kagame and the story of the RPF is key to its legitimacy. And that's why they go after people in Zambia. That's why they go after people in Canada or the UK. The propaganda to maintain that story is very, very intense. As you've all experienced on social media, as many of you have experienced physically, being harassed, being threatened. It's an effort to maintain that story of the president of Rwanda as the hero who stopped the genocide, as the hero who's led the country into a post-ethnic reconciliation, when in fact the truth is not that at all. And the RPF's past is mired in allegations of extreme war crimes and worse. So to what the Commonwealth is an effort again to throw that all under the rug, to hide the truth, and to create that media story of Rwanda as a modern country, Rwanda as a model of development. And so what our job is as objective journalists, as filmmakers, as many of you are maybe activists on this, it's to keep talking about the truth. Many of us listening to this might be survivors of violence. Keep talking about what happened to you and try to get the message out as much as possible.
So, given that example you're giving, Benedict, as you know, many Rwandans activists and also politicians from opposition side, they've been muted. Their voices have been muted. There are those outstanding evidences of what has been happening, what is happening. Why do you think the Rwandans' voices are being muted and not being listened?
I think there's a bit of Western racism, to be honest. I think that there's a degree of, to simplify it a lot, that there are a lot of bad people in Rwanda, a certain ethnic group that are all bad, and everything they say is tarnished in extremism. When in fact, and there's been a reluctance to hear any nuance of truth in what many people have been saying for nearly 3 decades. And so I think that's a primary component. And then I think that there's a kind of a geopolitical issue at play where sometimes conversations in French or in English or in Flemish or in Rwandan or in Swahili, they don't actually exchange. They're not crossing the linguistic borders. And so what I think people need to do is to make sure that, the RPF and their system is very, very professional. They are incredibly smart. They're buttoned up. They wear suits. They speak perfect English. And the game needs to be played on that level, not at, you need to target and to play that game at that level. So, and sometimes they're successfully portraying opposition figures in Rwanda as disheveled, as disorganized, as, people who can't speak English, all that stuff.
So you suggest that by using your linguistic skills, it can somehow help in some cases?
I also think that, targeting the English-speaking world in London and in Washington, D.C. is strategically very crucial.
Thank you. I will come back to you later on. So, Dr. Richard, so you have extensively researched and thought on the demography of armed conflicts, particularly in the Great Lakes region. So, considering that one of the important values of the Commonwealth is international peace and security, are you hopeful that Rwanda will no longer be in any conflict in a sub-regional? Ryan, I also want you to comment on what is happening right now in DRC, Congo.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. That's very important. I just wanted to highlight the fact that what we're seeing with the Commonwealth, starting from taking Rwanda into the Commonwealth and now planning to have the head of states meeting in Kigali, is a classic case of hypocrisy. And this is kind of punctuated with countless contradictions. As we can see, the values and principles of the Commonwealth, anyone wanting to assess Rwanda on that, I don't think they will even manage to pass 3 of them, the top ones. So with regards to the Democratic Republic of Congo and the relationship with Rwanda, and here need to be clear, when we say Rwanda, we actually talking about the regime led by Kagame, not actually the Rwandan population, who are very friendly and have had good relationship with the Democratic Republic of Congo. There have been studies actually assessing the excess deaths, so deaths caused by the armed conflict since the 1996 onwards, and different figures have been put forward. And I think the key lesson here is not focusing on the actual figures, because the death of any innocent person due to the armed conflict, any death, is just as bad as million deaths or thousands and so on. So this conflicting sort of narratives around how many people died and so on, to me, is kind of counterproductive. But the key lesson I would like to invite people to reflect on is the fact that these studies have highlighted that there have been excess deaths, but we need to go further and see if there is a way to actually detail these deaths, because we need justice.
Is there any way that we can push that justice to be?
Exactly. So this is the next step, really. And I'll just take one example. There's been a mapping activity commissioned by the United Nations. A report has been produced in 2010, the mapping report, looking at the human rights violations in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo between 1993 to 2003, coinciding with the period when the Kagame's troops were on the DRC soil. They've actually highlighted countless numbers of human rights violations, but this report has actually been shelved. This report has never been implemented. Why?
And it's not one only report. Many reports actually have been
exactly
in Europe, United Nations, and also in Europe as well.
Absolutely.
Nothing is done about it.
Nothing is done, and Kagame and his handlers are quite keen to keep these reports hidden. And when you hear Kagame himself talking about these reports, only recently he was saying something like, yes, he is actually criticizing the methodology. We know in social research, any approach has got strengths and weaknesses.
Yes.
So kind of focusing on the methodology is quite a really weak argument, because any approach we'll take to investigate these deaths will have strengths and weaknesses. So that's no reason. Then he was saying something like, okay, the report will create, if we implement this, it's going to create a narrative of a double genocide. So to him, this is almost his adversary. So he's going to undermine his claim to fame. So he doesn't want people, we don't care about double genocide. These are just words. We're talking about people, innocent people who have been killed. They need justice, regardless of what label you give them. These people need justice. So creating a counter-genocide, double genocide narrative and so on, these are just lame denial excuses that really shouldn't be even allowed in public spaces. So we need to be pushing for these reports. we really need to be pushing for accountability. We need to be pushing for justice, because the justice is not about the regime in Rwanda or denying the genocide of the Tutsis in 1994.
Yeah, justice.
It's for everyone. Justice is justice.
Thank you, Richard. So let's go back to Dr. Barry. Dr. Barry, so do you think the British government is doing enough to pressure to improve its human rights situation? For example, all Foreign Office reports have been critical to the record of Rwanda, for the past few years. I remember the last year's report on the periodic review. At the same time, UK is portraying Rwanda as a success story. I want you to clarify why though there's the stories are contradicting.
Well, I think
every time is it becoming like a political game, or it's something that we don't know?
Well, I think it goes back to the origin of how 1994 was explained to the world and how Britain bought into what you might call the Kagame narrative. And so I disagree slightly with an earlier speaker, because it's not just the truth about violations of human rights at an individual level. It's important to tell a narrative that is truthful. And whether you fall into the trap of double genocide or denial of genocide, you really need to start with the truth of what happened in 1994 in Rwanda. Now, Britain bought into and promoted a false narrative, and there was no Akazu Hutu extremist planned genocide of Tutsis. There simply was not, and there's no evidence for it. It's years and years of the International Tribunal of Rwanda failed to produce it. It's simply not there. And if you want to look at, how was this, the greatest perpetrator of the tragedy of 1994 is Kagame and the RPF. And if you, look at the facts, it will support that proposition. And then, having established the facts on the ground, then you can form an overall analysis as to what words are best used to describe what happened. And so that's why our starting point that I think we must insist on is that the narrative has got to be rewritten, and a truthful one replacing what's there. And, every time this happens, we're simply reinforcing the Kagame narrative by not challenging it. And, there's no other starting point here.
So in that way, what does the UK government do? I know there's many work that has been done surrounding this topic, and we have had some politicians openly saying the same thing, but still we see your government, the UK government supporting the Rwandan government. Also, at the same time, they hear those voices. They hear the voices of activists, the voices of people like you who have done outstanding work, but still nothing is done to show or to tell the truth. When is this truth going to be heard or to be shared?
Well, yes, it's immensely frustrating that we're still banging on the same door and it hasn't really opened. But, that shouldn't deter us. And the more of meetings like this that we have, the more that we make these connections, the more chance we have of getting to where we need to be. And I do think that in many ways, Britain has really overstepped the mark now with its asylum program to Rwanda. This is another area that's opened up another huge can of worms. How can, Priti Patel tell the world that Rwanda is a safe country when they know they're not telling the truth? And in initiating this program of sending asylum seekers to Rwanda, they are inviting this debate, and they're going to succeed in getting it as long as people like us are going to participate.
It was very good to see people standing up against that decision. Let's keep our hope that that will not happen. So let's go back to Panda. Charlo Evans from Zambia. So what do you think Rwanda can learn from Zambia in terms of being a Commonwealth value respecting the country?
I think there is a lot that Rwanda can learn from Zambia. Look, we may have our own problems in Zambia, politically, maybe socially, but we have made huge improvements when it comes to press freedom. Our new president has made some pronouncements which I feel he can live up to if he does not listen to some of his political cadres. I don't know how I can describe them. I think we are relatively free to express ourselves as journalists at this moment, as long as what we are doing is true. So you see, for the viewers who are seeing us from Zambia, I would like to bring up one very important aspect of this discussion. You might remember that Reporters Without Borders recently talked about the reporter in Rwanda who was sentenced to 7 years in prison. You know, the reporter is from Ishima TV, and you know Niyonsenga. You might know about Niyonsenga. And you know yes, and you know the charges that he was given were assault, obstructing police officers, and practicing journalism without a press card. I mean, you can really tell that, you know, they just want to get rid of this person, but they can't do it. So they are trying so hard to find other cases. And I think in Zambia at the moment, we are trying so hard through the current government to avoid this level of pettiness. But the president has a very difficult.
Do people, including the government officials, listen to this? Because
yeah, I mean, it's still happening. You know, we are far from being a perfect in a perfect situation. I, for one, you know, people, because they knew me when I came back from Europe, I was an IT engineer, so they didn't know that I was a journalist. So when they didn't like my reporting, they wanted to arrest me based on the fact that I was pretending to be a journalist. You know, these things happen everywhere in Africa. So instead of discussing what a person is discussing, they would rather find a reason to arrest you. But I feel that we should give credit to President Hakainde Hichilema on the fact that he says, look, if someone is telling the truth, leave them. Let's work on what they have. So whistleblowers are not supposed to be arrested, which was not the case even in the previous regime. And I feel that Rwanda should listen, should watch. We are neighbors. We are people who have really come a long way. We were from a one-party state, which is more like the situation in Rwanda right now. But we have made strides. You know, we have cried. We've gone through a lot of issues, but we've made sacrifices. And I think as Rwanda now heading the Commonwealth chairmanship, they should really realize what that normally means. What does it mean? It means that they should be representing the Commonwealth. It's about democracy. It's about human rights. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's go back to Benedict Moran. So let's repeat this kind of a question again. So, do you think the Commonwealth will have any positive impact to Rwanda? If so, which one? Or any lesson?
No, I don't. I think, as previous guests have said, that the Commonwealth is a whitewashing exercise, and that Kagame has used, President Kagame has used these organizations to support his legitimacy. That's why he's, you know, left the Francophonie, but also then rejoined the Francophonie, putting his former Minister of Foreign Affairs at the head of it. Nonetheless, these, I think political leaders around the world know the truth about Rwanda. They know the truth in general about what's happened in the past. And the signaling that will happen in Kigali, the handshakes, the meetings, the talk about goodwill and development and democracy, it's an opportunity for British leaders as well as Canadian leaders and others to also signal to their own domestic constituents how good of a person they are and how they care about Africa, and look at Paul Kagame and our connection to him and all that stuff. So I truly do not think, if anything, this is yet another step to, sorry to be so negative, but I don't think it's going to be helpful to civil society or to independent voices or to any of the victims of, yes.
Let's go back now to Dr. Richard. So Dr. Richard, what is the most important message will you give to the head of government who going to be in Kigali next week attending this CHOGM meeting?
Yes, politician. Yeah, I'm not the one believing in politicians. I guess sometimes people get caught in this debate and thinking we're looking for a winning side, you know, Kagame to be toppled or whatever president to come on and so on. But I guess the key message is those values and principles on paper, they look so good. And it's just consistency. If you want them to be applied in the UK, want them to be applied in Rwanda, want them to be applied in Congo, because at the end of the day, the only place where violence can actually be neutralized is through democratic processes. So if Rwanda can be encouraged to democratize, properly democratized, and other countries in the region democratized, that way, I think we can get to the point where it's not about an individual winning or his ideas, but actually having proper structures and systems that actually can allow people to have a say in what matters the most to them. Because curtailing freedom of speech, curtailing freedom of expression, and actually using proxy armies in neighboring countries only because no one can tell us what to do is actually not going to help the Commonwealth, is not going to help the region, the people around there. So the people are suffering, and these leaders keep having these meetings and accolades and so on. So yes, democracy, they need to be consistent throughout.
Well, thank you so much. So Barry, with this Commonwealth meeting taking place next week in Kigali, do you think things may turn into a positive way in the area of governance in Rwanda?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
I'm saying with the CHOGM meeting taking place in Rwanda, do you think things may turn into a positive way in the area of governance in Rwanda?
Well, it really all depends on just how much debate this creates and how much discussion there is about Rwanda that's generated from it. And that's really down to us and down to people that have a stake in democracy worldwide and particularly with regard to Rwanda. You know, if nothing is done, it will be a success story for Kagame. And, you know, people are paying a very heavy price for this.
So what will be your last message into this before we conclude?
My message is freedom of speech. No holds barred on discussing what happened in Rwanda. 100% support of free speech in Rwanda and, of course, around the world about Rwanda. That's the starting point. It's the foundation of democracy. Until you achieve the right or exercise the right to free speech, there's no possibility of going forward to a democratic Rwanda.
Thank you. So as last question to you, Mr. Panda Charlo Evans. So Zambia has been a member of Commonwealth for many years than Rwanda. So what Zambia has benefited from that membership, and what Rwanda expects to gain, you know, that Zambia has always been enjoying Also, if you can also make some more like final comments before we finish.
I feel that we need to, I think as Zambia, we need to be able to speak to the political leadership in Rwanda so that they understand that we disapprove of what is happening in that country. That we shouldn't really pretend more like all is well in Rwanda. When it comes to journalists, they need to respect journalists in the sense that they should know that journalists actually are the providers of information which is needed for them, for all the people of Rwanda to make informed decisions. You know, you can't have democracy without proper journalism in a country. At the moment, that is non-existent in Rwanda. And I believe that we stand really on a strong ground as Zambians because of the respect that we have, having helped liberate most of the Southern African countries. You know, we ran the non-aligned movement. I think our president should be able, through closed-door discussions, talk to the political leadership in Rwanda and simply say, look, just do what you must do. You don't need to suppress press freedom. You cannot, whenever you are doing this, it simply means that there is something you are hiding. And I think this should be spoken about openly. The more we discuss this, the more likely it is that we can make progress in Rwanda.
Thank you so much. Let's go back to Benedict as the last question. Benedict, do you think this Commonwealth meeting taking place in Rwanda can it be an opportunity to expose the hidden side of Rwanda? So absolutely. I want to answer this question from, you know, as a journalist, as an activist, also as someone who has been doing again different work on human rights area.
Absolutely, I think it's a tremendous opportunity for civil society and for journalists. Just to point out that previous panelists, Anjan Sundaram and myself, we applied for accreditation to CHOGM and were rejected. This is a way that Rwandan authorities, or whoever rejected, controls the story about Rwanda and the Rwandan Patriotic Front as a success story. It's upon us, journalists, to speak truth. It's upon us, the academics and the activists, to continue to use this opportunity to talk about kind of the other side. Some history that is in the official narrative is true. The genocide of the Tutsi did happen. There's a lot that is untold. There is an enormous amount of people who are suffering because they're not allowed to talk about their trauma that they experienced in the 90s, in the 2000s, and today living in Rwanda. And so I think that the best thing that we can do is to help those voices to be heard in whatever way, and thus changing the narrative in foreign capitals about Rwanda.
Thank you so much. Okay, Richard, as a final comment, so I want to answer this question from an academic perspective. So given the work that has been done in Great Lakes Regional and on ongoing atrocities being committed there, there's a report, there's research that have been conducted. But as you said, those research, those work has been kept in the shelves. So what do you think can be done to make sure that those reports or those research that have been done on human rights issues taking place in the Great Lakes region does not go there just to sit there also, but also it's there to do something about it?
Absolutely. I think as many of the people intervened earlier said, we need to keep these debates going. We need to be talking about these issues. We need to bring them to the front at any opportunity. So this is the only way we can promote these studies, we can promote this discussion, this conversation. and then help policymakers to get a chance to, look into these studies, looking into these reports, and find a way to implement them. Because if we're not talking about them, many people, I'm surprised if I speak to some people, they're not even aware of some of these studies that they exist. So talking about them, promoting them will be a best way to kind of keeping them into the limelight.
Thank you all for joining us today. As you all said, this is the beginning. So as I think, as you all said, the sessions like this, I think the only way that we can start telling our stories, sharing our stories, also sharing your expertise on what we know about Rwanda. As someone who comes from Rwanda, I've been also myself being a victim. 2.5 years ago, my two brothers were abducted. So this is common to many people, not only to me. And the only way to denounce this unhuman activities by exposing, by saying that, what has happened, because you can't experience such unhuman thing, and then people tell you not to speak out. So the only way we can do it's by speaking out this, by inviting people like you to come and then share what you know, also share what you have heard, also what you have experienced. So thank you so much for being with us today. So I pass my microphone back to Freddie so that he can invite the next panelist. Thank you.
Hello, thank you all. I hope that because I did have two follow-up questions. I don't know if we still have the panelist on or not. Okay, so only Dr. Barrel is there. Hello. Okay, so my question is, we've heard Benedict telling us that actually the last news we heard is that Benedict and Anjan have been refused to enter Rwanda to cover the Commonwealth meeting. So unbelievable but true, coming from an organization that like the Commonwealth that says that they are there really to support freedom of speech and so on. So that being said, this happens a few days before the meeting in Rwanda, and Rwanda has not yet been a chair of the Commonwealth, which is going to be the next 2 years. What should we be worrying about then? What should we be worrying that these type of things of of not supporting freedom of speech will be? Is that what we're going to be living in the next 2 years? I'll start by Mr. Collins, please.
Yeah, well, I can't really say more than I have so far. We just have to increase the pressure, and we have to make demands that all voices around the issue of Rwanda need to be heard, and the Commonwealth must open up a free discussion about Rwanda. And it's really down to us to do our bit to make this happen. It would be wonderful if we could have more forums like this to get into a little more depth into various areas and to put pressure where it's needed. But I'm quite confident that we are going to make gains in this area. This is coming to a head in some respects. They can't push the narrative too far before it goes over the other side. And I think we may be approaching that.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Richard, what do you think about that? Do you think in the next 2 years we'll probably see President Kagame leading the Commonwealth as he leads his country, Rwanda?
That's the worry. That's the worry. But I guess, as Barry said, we just need to keep pushing this, keep having this debate, and also networking in person now that we don't have COVID and so on. If there are opportunities to meet up and share experiences, I think that would be a best way to kind of keep this going, because many people are not aware of what's going on. And if we give people the opportunity to come together, share experiences, share contact, that way we can really push this and knock on the doors of those policymakers so that they can look into this quite properly.
Okay, thank you very much. And lastly, Evans, what's your take on that, please?
I believe that Rwanda cannot stay without the support of the West. And if the West wants democracy to be exported to Rwanda, they need to believe and understand that journalism maintains democracy. It's a progressive tool for social change. We need them to live by their words. As long as they do not do their part, I know that it will be maybe even worse. I mean, Paul Kagame is somebody who is not going to listen to anybody without pressure.
Okay, thank you very much for being with us. And now we are going to go with the next panel. And I'm inviting my friend Ansbert Hundineza.
Yep, you got it right. Yeah, thank you, Fred, for doing such a great job in coordinating this event. I'll start by acknowledging our incoming panelists, the technical team, and our viewers both inside and outside Rwanda. I'll also introduce myself. My name is Ansbert. I'm a Rwandan Australian activist, currently based in Brisbane, Queensland, in Australia. My professional background is in health. I hold a master's degree in public health from the University of Queensland. It is my pleasure today to be amongst the facilitators of this highly informative event on spotlights on Rwanda against the Commonwealth Values and Principles. It is my honor to introduce the third panel, which includes men and women of high caliber and expertise, not only on Rwanda, but across other geopolitical regions. I'll start by formally introducing Mr. Charles Washira. Is Charles with us in the studio?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles, for coming and for attending. I'll do a very quick and brief introduction of Mr. Charles, but he will obviously have time to speak to our audiences. Mr. Charles Washira is an East African correspondent for some of the world notable news outlets. Previously, he was an East Africa correspondent for Bloomberg LP, based in Nairobi. He covers eclectic issues including regional politics, business, human rights, and environment, including IT. He is an alumnus of the University of Nairobi. Thank you for coming. And I'll move on to our next panelist, Ms. Michaela Arong from the UK, all the way from the UK. Can you please say hi to our followers?
Hi.
Thank you for coming. I'll also do a very brief introduction of Ms. Rong. Ms. Rong is a British journalist and an author who spent 6 years as a foreign correspondent in Africa for Reuters, the BBC, and the Financial Times. Her third book, titled It's Our Turn to Eat, the story of a Kenyan whistleblower, published in 2009, tells the story of John Githongo, a Kenyan journalist and civil society activist who in 2012 took on a senior anti-corruption role within the newly elected government of President Mwai Kibaki. In 2009, she authored a novel, Borderlines, a legal thriller with a female lawyer protagonist. It focuses on border dispute between two fictional states in the Horn of Africa, which the Financial Times reviewer thought resembled Ethiopia-Eritrea disputes in 1998-2000. In 2021, she published Do Not Disturb, the story of a political matter and an African regime gone wrong. This book is about Rwanda, its President Paul Kagame, and the matter of Patrick Karegeya in South Africa. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you on. And I'll introduce our last panelist, David Hondieli, if that is pronounced correct. David? Is David with us?
Hi.
Thank you. If I did pronounce it wrong, please forgive me.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you for joining us today. Mr. David is a writer, an investigative journalist, a broadcaster whose work has appeared on CNN, The Africa Report, Al Jazeera, The Washington Post. His work is satirist on the Others News. Nigeria's answer to the Daily Show has featured in the New York Magazine and the Netflix documentary Larry Chow's Dangerous World of Comedy. In 2018, he was nominated by the U.S. State Department for the 2019 Edward Murrow Program for journalists under the International Visitors Leadership Program. In 2021, he won the People's Journalist Prize for Africa 2020 for his work on unraveling predatory legislation that was being rushed through Nigerian House of Representatives. In June 2021, he was elected as Africa's only representative on a list of 12 writers and journalists from around the world chosen to take part in Substack inaugural 1 million Substack local program. Thank you for joining us today, David. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now I'll start by posing a few questions on our panelists. I'll start with Ms. Charles, if Ms. Charles can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Yes, my question, or the questions that most people or most viewers will be having right now is, as a credible and a well-respected journalist with a very extensive knowledge of not only Kenya, but of East Africa political arena, what do you think Rwanda, as a member of Commonwealth, can learn from Kenya in terms of respecting Commonwealth values, which to a larger extent overlaps with the East African Community Establishing Treaty, particularly in relation to separation of powers, democracy, and freedom of expression?
Well, that question is quite long. However, let me start by saying that I've been a journalist beginning in 1990, and therefore that particular time in Kenya we had a very autocratic leader by the name of Daniel Arap Moi. And what I've learned is that what Rwanda is going through is not really something exceptional. I think Kenya also went through it. But what saved the grace, the face of Kenya, is that we had a very powerful civil society. And what I believe is that what Rwanda can learn from Kenya, for example, is that change is ultimately going to come from within Rwanda itself. I think all these conferences that are taking place, like most of the distinguished guests have said here, are mostly to bolster the image of Paul Kagame and his administration. But until and unless the people in Rwanda themselves are able to form into some formidable force, you're likely to have Kagame remaining in power for as long as he wants. And Kagame is a very good showman in the sense that he knows where to touch and who to do. For example, you realize that he has Tony Blair of the UK as an advisor. You're aware that I think last year he also tapped a former banker from the Swiss bank, very powerful Africa, who's able to pull resources from all over Africa. And then the third thing that we tend to forget is that geopolitics it plays a very major factor. In particular, in this particular time when China is actually getting a lot of influence within the region. And you realize just last week, the Belgian king came to say sorry, I think, to Congo. So, and don't forget, last year, France also came to do its bit in Rwanda. And what is happening is that China is eating into some of these so-called traditional countries. But whether it's possible for them to have undue influence, I don't think that will happen very soon. So what I'm thinking is that this conference in itself, nothing much will change. Kagame will get legitimacy and will continue having meetings all over again. But the only thing that can make a difference in Rwanda, I repeat again, is if all the people in the diaspora who are actually opposed or probably believe that something is wrong with Rwanda, like I believe something is totally wrong, you need to talk with one voice. I get the feeling that when I'm doing my stories, for instance, and I talk to the guys in diaspora and the ones who are back at home, there's a very big disconnect. You find that the so-called activists in Rwanda who normally talk anonymously, they kind of think the guys who are outside in the diaspora do not understand what is happening in Rwanda itself. So I think that what is important here is that Rwanda, irrespective of whether you're in Rwanda or outside Rwanda, you need to have a common voice, so to speak. Right now, you're desperate. You're desperate sort of a workforce. You cannot be able to deal with Kagame. Kagame is something else. And having said that, let me finish. Having said that, I have Kenyans who have lived in Rwanda, and when they come back into the country, the one thing that they say is that, God, that place is impossible. Because what happens is you can't talk. There's a lot of fear. And therefore, I believe that the beginning is that the Rwandans who are out there in the diaspora and the ones who are in Uganda and in Rwanda who feel that change is necessary, I think you need to meet to form a common front and talk, and then you lobby hard, not just with the Commonwealth, but to other organizations that bankroll the regime in Rwanda. I think that's the only way we can create change in that particular country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. So to summarize what you have said, it seems like I'm repeating myself. The technical team, please. Thank you. To just summarize what you have basically said is that Rwandans need to unite and have a united front to basically press for their freedoms of expressions, but also you had a bit of a question about the changing in global politics with China and other big players also having a foot in East Africa and Africa at large, that it is likely to affect the change that we seek. Thank you very much for such an insightful contribution. I'll come back to you later on, but let's move to Ms. Wong. I have a very sort of simple but direct question, which goes by this. By supporting Rwanda's membership to the Commonwealth, despite its record of serious human rights violations and lack of democracy, do you think the British government is pushing Rwanda into the right path, facilitated by the Commonwealth values?
Well, Rwanda joined the Commonwealth in 2009. So this is a decision that was taken 13 years ago. And I think it's well worth reading, as I did when I was preparing for the Commonwealth. I read the report that was drawn up by Professor Yashpal Ghai, the Kenyan jurist and lawyer who's an expert on constitutional law. And he drew up a report. He was commissioned by something called the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, which is an NGO which takes a particular interest in human rights in the Commonwealth. And he drew up a report on whether or not the Commonwealth should let let Rwanda in, given that it had no historical link to the Commonwealth. It wasn't it was a Francophone country. It was a former Belgian colony and a former German colony. And his conclusion was very, very straightforward. And I recommend everyone read that report. He said Rwanda by no means meets the criteria, the values that are supposed to be upheld and enshrined by the Commonwealth are not met by Rwanda. It's a very, very long way off. And in fact, he advised the Commonwealth to say to Rwanda, this is part of a process. You can join eventually if you improve your performance on various human rights fronts. He was also very aware of the role that Rwanda was playing, destabilizing the entire Great Lakes region. And he mentioned that in his report. So this was excellent advice. And I spoke to Professor Yashpal Ghai before the Commonwealth. And I said, do you still stick by that advice? And he said, yes, absolutely. The trouble is the Commonwealth rejected that advice, did not follow it. And instead they let Rwanda in. They didn't put it on probation. They didn't say, let's come back to this in a year's time, see if things have changed in Rwanda, see if you've improved your human rights score, your governance score. Instead they were allowed straight in. And I think there was a sort of feeling in the Commonwealth, or the view was expressed that Rwanda simply by being a member of the Commonwealth, might change and might reform, might become more democratic and improve its human rights performance. And I think we can say, given what we know about Rwanda and the human rights reports that continue to be published by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Freedom House, and also from the journalism that people do on Rwanda, that this did not happen. And if in fact, it seems to me fairly clear that Rwanda's dictatorship has got more extreme, because that is what tends to happen with dictatorships. As the years go by, these kind of regimes become more polarized, less accountable, and the president becomes more entrenched. So the opposite has happened from what people were saying. You know, the idea that joining the Commonwealth encouraged positive change, sadly, is not true. And I am very concerned that by being allowed to stage, I mean, one of my beefs with the Commonwealth is the Commonwealth meeting was supposed to take place 2 years ago in Rwanda, and it was postponed. Oh, maybe it was even longer than that, 3 years ago. Anyway, it was postponed twice because of the COVID pandemic. So that meant that for the last few years, the Commonwealth could have looked at Rwanda, could have read the reports, could have seen the role it's playing in the region and domestically and the human rights concerns, and could have said to Kagame, listen, you missed your turn. Now, you know, there's a long queue of people who want to host the Commonwealth. You've missed your go. It wasn't your fault. It was because of COVID. You've missed your go, and now we'll stage it somewhere else. And they didn't do that, which was really showed, firstly, I'm sure that there was immense pressure coming from Kagame, who loves to stage conferences in Kigali. He loves, because the affirmation that he knows he's going to get. So they didn't listen, and they allowed him to stage it in Kigali. That was another big miss. So yes, sadly, the staging of the Commonwealth meeting in Kigali will provide him a wonderful stage in which to broadcast to the world in general and to Commonwealth members, many of whom have very dodgy human rights records and governance records themselves. He'll be saying, here I am, look, this is what I do, and this is a model. You can follow it too. You too can violate human rights across in your own country. You too can destabilize your neighboring countries, and you'll still win the admiration of bilateral donors. You'll still win millions of pounds worth in foreign aid, and you will still get to hold a Commonwealth meeting. So that is the implicit message of staging the Commonwealth meeting, CHOGM, in Kigali, and it's a very, very negative message to send out. I mean, let's face it, a lot of the leaders who are going to be going, the government ministers, the leaders who will be going to Kigali are not exactly progressive Democrats themselves. They're not exactly people who tolerate freedom of the press or who are careful not to interfere in the staging of elections and respect the rule of law. They've got, you know, there are a lot of governments who are going to be representing Kigali have very dodgy records themselves. So what they will be understanding and grasping when they're in Kigali is that you can do all those things and not even be criticized by the Commonwealth itself and by Western donors. And that is a very negative message. So my one solace in all of this is I am very pleased that I know that Benedict didn't get his accreditation and Anjan didn't get it, but it seems that there have been, at the last moment, the Commonwealth and the Rwandan authorities are granting accreditations to journalists who want to cover the event. And there is something about having a lot of journalists in a city. Yes, you may try and control them, and we know that journalists are being assigned government handlers when they go and they want to talk to refugees in the various camps in Rwanda, and we know that they're hardly allowed to operate on their own. But if you have a lot of Western journalists who are used to asking their leaders rude questions, and you have them wandering around a capital and putting awkward questions during press conferences, and I hope they will, sometimes some really interesting stuff emerges. And I was very pleased to see, for example, the ITV journalist, a political editor, Paul Brand, who went on Twitter. He'd only been Rwanda, I think, a couple of days. He'd been talking to people, interviewing people, and he sort of said, well, one thing I know, and it was clear he had no background, didn't know anything about Rwanda when he first went out there. He said, one thing I can tell, this is not a free society. And he said, the people that we interviewed the first day, he said this on Twitter, people we were interviewing the first day have been picked up by the government and questioned. And then, that is not something that happens if you're a journalist operating in Canada or the UK or the US or France or Italy. So I thought that was excellent, because this was a journalist coming to the story cold, and he was saying, I can tell this is not a free society, and the way my sources have been treated just in the last few days is a cause for concern. So the more journalists who go and cover CHOGM, the better. And I do think that some really interesting little details will come out during this conference.
Thank you very much for such a great contribution. While you were speaking, something triggered my interest in regards to the reports and recommendations that were provided to the British government of not allowing Rwanda to be a member of the Commonwealth. And I was just reflecting back to some other countries which had to be suspended from the Commonwealth, the likes of Zimbabwe, the likes of Nigeria, where David comes from. Historically, they've been countries that were suspended. But with Rwanda, what is so special that not even being suspended, but there is that special consideration of even from the start? We know that in the early days of the RPF regime, there was this feeling of guilty that the Western countries had of not being able to stop the genocide against the Tutsi. But here we are, almost 30 years later, we're still having this sort of special treatment to Paul Kagame. What do you see is the problem?
Well, there was a feeling of guilt that has certainly played a role in the way Western countries deal with Rwanda, because the Rwandan officials and Kagame himself play that card ruthlessly and very effectively, because the international community still feels very bad about its failure to intervene during the genocide. But I think you mustn't forget another reason why Rwanda was allowed into the Commonwealth in 2009. It is because of the traditional competition between France and the Anglo-Saxon world, i.e. America and Britain, in Africa. And this is a sort of a legacy of colonialism. So there was this feeling that, look, here is Rwanda and a young leadership that is extremely disillusioned and bitter over what role the French had played supporting the previous regime of Juvenal Habyarimana, and they want to join the Commonwealth. They have no historical links with the Commonwealth, but never mind, this will allow us to expand. And, I'm sure there was also a British interest, and no doubt the Americans would have been quite keen on it too, although they don't belong to the Commonwealth, saying, they're saying we want to join the Anglophone world. Kagame grew up in Uganda. I don't know if he even speaks French. He was part of that English-speaking sphere of influence in Africa. So there was a desire to capture Rwanda and sort of, embrace it in the Anglo-Saxon world. And what's very interesting, I don't know if it's come up previously in this meeting, but what we're seeing at this Commonwealth meeting is that Gabon and Togo, which are two Francophone countries which also have no previous connection with the British Empire or with Britain's colonial legacy, are also applying to join the Commonwealth. So what we're seeing is this clash between the French world, French influence in Africa, British influence in Africa continues. This is a competition, that goes back to the scramble of Africa of the 19th century, and we're seeing it continuing, and therefore, the Commonwealth is therefore very happy to take on new applicants. And a lot of African countries at the moment are feeling very disillusioned about the French role in Africa, especially in the Sahel, and they want to make a very obvious gesture towards France, as we feel that your involvement and your influence over our countries is not healthy, is not benign, and we are looking elsewhere, including to China. But the Commonwealth is also a sphere of influence that is obviously attracting some interest. So this is also about a kind of a competition for influence between these two, the Anglo-Saxon world and the French world.
Thank you very much. This is very interesting also. The previous speakers or panelists spoke about the Commonwealth being more like a political tool with some, geopolitical interest. I think you have sort of touched on that one as well. Thank you for your contribution. This will take me to our next speaker, Mr. David. Mr. David, given what most of Africans think of Kagame is, clearly what Ms. Wrong said is quite the opposite, because I know that what we see on social media, a lot of people think Kagame as this Pan-Africanist man who stand up against the bullies, the Western bullies, but we are hearing the opposite to that. So what is the general view of Rwanda and Nigeria? And you think its membership to the Commonwealth will bring both Nigeria and Rwanda closer in terms of cooperations, in terms of learning from each other?
Right. So this question goes to the heart of why I consider Paul Kagame to be uniquely dangerous in Africa. Now, my background in journalism is a bit non-standard. People typically move from journalism into comms and PR because there's more money there. I moved from comms and PR to journalism, in part as a result of what I saw during my time in PR. The PR stroke strategic communications industry in Africa is pretty much unregulated. So people like Paul Kagame spend millions of dollars annually on putting out and shaping these narratives, not just within Rwanda, but across the African continent. So this guy is not just a danger to Rwanda, to the Great Lakes, or to Southern Africa. It's a danger to me in Nigeria as well, because the narratives he is funding from Kigali are getting here and they are having an impact. And I'll give you one very tiny example of that. So there's a state in Nigeria called Kaduna State. It's statistically the most dangerous, the most unsafe state in Nigeria in terms of death, conflict death per capita, right? You have armed terrorist groups from the Sahel, you have armed bandits, you have kidnappers just operating freely in Kaduna State. Now, the governor of Kaduna State is a guy who has stated that he's an admirer of Paul Kagame. Why is he an admirer of Paul Kagame? He says Kagame's example shows that competent leadership is more important than democracy, right? And this is a narrative that has been seeded and has been spread and has captured a lot of the popular imagination across Africa, and specifically in Nigeria, where, bear in mind, we only just came out of military dictatorship in '99, so it's been barely 21 years, and already we have a large number of people now who didn't experience military dictatorship, because statistically Nigeria's median age is 18.1. So statistically, most Nigerians in existence never experienced the military era. They don't know what dictatorship looks like. And they have these dangerous narratives flying around and seeding their minds that, look, the reason Africa is the way it is, and the reason Nigeria is the way it is because we use too much energy on politicking, on elections, on democracy. That what you need is a strong man who can come in and quote unquote fix the country, which apparently is what Paul Kagame supposedly has done in Rwanda. And
the Singapore scenario.
Exactly. So when I first took note of this in 2019, that this is no longer just like a meme on social media. This is an idea that is starting to have actual political currency in Nigeria. That's when I decided that, okay, in my capacity as a journalist, as a columnist at the time, I want to do something about this. So I wrote an article, right? It was just like a 1,000 word column. It wasn't a huge expose or something. It was just an opinion column where I basically got hold of statistics, basically like really basic statistics like GDP per capita, income per capita, access to electricity, percentage of roads that are tarred, access to internet per capita, blah, 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 blah. And I basically put forward an argument that the entire story of Paul Kagame being this competent dictator is a total lie. It's a fabrication. It's not true. That he fails not just in terms of democracy and human rights, but even at the things that he's supposedly optimized for. So we have a country that he has been, at the time, he had been in power for a quarter of a century. It's always coming up to 30 years now. And there was a statistic that blew my mind that 91% of roads in Rwanda were not tarmacked, were not tarred, as at 2019. 9% of roads in Rwanda were tarmacked. Or that the total percentage of the Rwandan population that had access to the national grid, to electricity, was under 50%. Sorry, it was 51%, sorry. Which, I mean, I found amazing, because even Nigeria, which we all know has a huge power sector deficit, has about 65% in Nigeria. So how is this country that is doing so well and so well thought of, how is this country doing worse than Nigeria? How is that? How do you manage to do worse than Nigeria? Nigeria is statistically one of the worst places to exist on this planet. How do you manage to do worse than Nigeria? And then not only do worse than Nigeria, be praised for it. Have people think that you are competent. You are, because as you mentioned, every time there's some international event or something, obviously he loves having those events in Kigali. Then you put him up against some journalist or whatever, and this is what his comms people are very good at doing. They're very good at tapping into the African psyche. They know what sort of fires up the African imagination, right? Because these productions are not made for Rwanda alone; they're made for the continent. So there's this particular one I remember from 2018. I think he was in. This wasn't even in Kigali. I think he was in Geneva, and he was having a conversation with some journalists, and the lady said something to the effect of, "How can you do you have the basically that his country, that's Rwanda, has a huge human rights problem. So on what basis is he coming to speak here today?" And he fired back at her, said something to the effect of basically that you are always trying to dictate to Africa and to talk to us about human rights, that who gave you the right to do that, that who are you, right? And that exchange, someone then took a little video clip of that exchange, a 30-second video, and it just went viral all over social media platforms, and people were just absolutely creaming their pants about it. Oh, this guy's standing up for Africa. He stands up to the white imperialists, because that's something that fires the African imagination, right? Because obviously the history that Africa has had is a history where living under a colonial jackboot, living under a colonial experience has created this sort of very deep inferiority complex and the very deep sense of resentment. So he knows how to tap into that and take advantage of it. So yeah, then he gets positioned as this sort of Pan-Africanist champion who's quote unquote standing up to the white imperialists or whatever. And I tried to deconstruct that in this article that I did. And look, this country's budget, government budget, annual government budget, more than 50% of it is funded by the same people he's supposedly standing up to. It's donor money, right? This country is almost unfathomably poor, right? This country is so poor that Haiti has a per capita income that is almost twice that of Rwanda. If Haiti has a per capita income that is twice yours, Haiti, then why on earth are you being held up as that quote unquote Singapore of Africa, that Switzerland of Africa? It's not true, right? And my experience, immediately this story was published, immediately it went out, sort of gave me a window into what Rwanda and the Rwandan regime actually are. Because this was a story that was published in Nigeria for a Nigerian audience. And the point of publishing that story was to tackle that narrative that I saw being spread in Nigeria. And the very first responses to the story were Rwandans who were very angry. It caused such a fuss that the Rwandan High Commissioner to Nigeria actually...
If I might just ask you a very quick question here before it escapes my mind. Did you, during these times that you wrote this article, were you at any stage approached or threatened by any members of the Rwandan government or security forces or security agents?
I was just about to come to that.
Okay.
So the Rwandan High Commissioner to Nigeria at the time, his name was Stanislas Kamanzi. He picked up the phone and he called the publisher of Business Day, where I wrote the column. and had a very like a 5-minute shouting match with this guy, telling the guy to take down the article, to delete it off the website. That is nonsense and it's rubbish. And then I started getting the death threats, hundreds of death threats. People telling me your friends are gonna die, your family's gonna die, you don't know what you've got yourself into, blah blah blah. Like you're a traitor, you're being sponsored by Western imperialists, you're a tool of regime change, blah blah blah, all sorts, right? Hundreds of those, literally hundreds. Like my mentions on Twitter, my DMs, they've got hold of my email address somehow as well. We're just full of these things, right? And then there was a I think it's like a government-sponsored publication in Rwanda. I think it's called either Great Lakes Eye or Great Lakes Post.
Oh, Great Lakes Eye, yes, that's one. Yeah,
very
very
common.
common.
They went and published this like hit piece on me. Like if you Google Great Lakes Eye and my name, you see the article is still up there. And they basically said this guy is not a real journalist. He's a tabloid trash, blah blah blah. That just totally rubbished me. And Business Day refused to take the story down because why would they take it down? I just wrote a column, and it was factual. So what they then did when all of that didn't work, the intimidation didn't work, and I made it very clear that you can't intimidate me. Like I lived through General Abacha. You can't intimidate me. I've been through dictatorship before. I'm old enough to have lived through it. Then they changed tack. They got in contact with a guy who was a senior editor at Business Day, and they basically gave this guy like an all expense paid trip to Kigali for a week. So they treated him like royalty, right? They flew him in on first class on Rwanda, took him to Kigali,
5-star hotel.
Best hotels, took him to all the nice places they want to see in Kigali, got to spend time with some lovely Rwandan women, who are very beautiful. And then he came back to Nigeria and then he wrote this glowing front page story article about Rwanda and how Paul Kagame has changed the face of Rwanda, because that's like the narrative that they love to run with. So what this told me very clearly was that this is a regime that has no interest in interacting with any kind of objective facts or evidence or truth. All they are interested in is a narrative. And if you do not toe the line, if you do not express positions that are in line with that narrative, whether you are within Rwandan borders or not, they're going to come after you. I was warned. Bear in mind, I was living in Lagos at the time. I was warned that if possible, I should change my address. That this guy goes after critics both inside Rwanda and outside. And at the time, I wasn't really that familiar with stories like that of Patrick Karigaya and whatnot. So this came as a shock to me. And then when I started looking it up, I was just absolutely mind blown. This guy has sent killer squads, death squads to Belgium and to the UK. Like, how does a country that is this poor, that has half of its budget funded by donor money, how does it have the money to train and equip death squads to sort of travel around the world killing people? How does this happen, and how is it allowed to happen? How is it that the world knows that this is what this guy is using your donor money to do, and they can't stop handing over their money to him? It was just completely wild to me. And that's
Thank you very much. We'll come back to this. I'm gonna go back before I go back to Ms. Rong and Charles. I'll just ask one quick question. Given this experience you had with the Rwandan government and how they operate and how they sort of suppress freedoms and media, do you think, or what do you have to say about Rwanda being a member of the Commonwealth, or even hosting?
So first of all, was that question directed at me or at Charles?
You first. I'm gonna go to this wrong after that. Yes.
Right. So I think first of all, the hosting of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Kigali is nothing short of a travesty. But I think it's in keeping with what the Commonwealth has become. As was mentioned earlier, because there's a sort of geopolitical tussle between the Anglosphere and the Francosphere, where the French believe that Africa is pretty much the last place on earth where they have any kind of significant influence outside of their borders. So they're trying their hardest to hold on to what is left. So what is like a receding sphere of influence, and the Anglosphere is trying to expand itself. So in the process of expanding itself. The sort of criteria for inclusion in that sphere are sort of dropping massively. So you mentioned the Bongo regime. I think what country was this now? Gabon. And the Eyadema regime, the Eyademas who have had a 50+ year family dynasty in Togo, they have seen what Kagame has been able to do, and they're trying to follow the same blueprint. So I think the Commonwealth at this point in time, and sorry, just going back to what you said about the possibility of Nigeria and Rwanda becoming more aligned as a result of shared Commonwealth membership, I think at the moment that would be a terrible thing, because the influence that the Kagame regime has been able to exert on the African public imagination and on African politics and on African governance is a terrible thing. There are two major things it has done in Africa, in my observation. The first thing is that it has demonstrated to African governments that there's an entire method and system of governance that has nothing to do with results and is 100% based on optics, which is very effective, right? It's like running a startup and you've optimized it for vanity metrics, right? You don't have any paying customers, you don't have any income, but you have all sorts of vanity metrics. The governance version of that, they figured out how to do it, and Paul Kagame is at the vanguard of that. And then the second thing that he has done to politics in Africa is that he has made people understand that it's possible to whack people, like we're in the 60s and the 70s all over again, right? That thing we came out of in the 90s and early 90s, where everyone was moving to a more democratic system, that no, we can go back to the way it used to be, but the world doesn't have to know, because your optics game is so on point that as was mentioned in the previous panel, you have the right, you know how to use the right catchphrases, you know how to speak English with the right accent if need be, you have the right contacts, you know how to present yourself the right way, and the world will respond to you based 100% off of these optics. And it doesn't matter whether your country is a literal hellhole, nobody will care, right? So I think Nigeria becoming more aligned with Rwanda would be a terrible thing, because I think the Rwanda model is already starting to take hold in Nigeria. I think even more of that would be a bad thing. I think Rwanda first and foremost needs to reform itself, and the first stage of that self-reformation must be that Paul Kagame, one way or the other, must be eased out, because that guy is bad news.
Thank you for a very insightful contribution. I'll move up the list back to Ms. Arong. In your book, we have basically touched on these issues of threats, social media threats, physical threats against journalists, both in Rwanda and abroad. Would you like to elaborate and talk more about that, on how the Rwandan government threatens journalists, both online and physical threats?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd just like to say, I think David gave one of the best presentations I've ever heard on the topic of Rwanda, and it's so interesting to hear the Nigerian take on it. Everything he said chimed incredibly true, including that satisfaction that I've seen Africans, not just Nigerians, but in Ghana, in South Africa and Ethiopia, where they see this butt-kicking, dynamic, sort of I don't take any nonsense from the West act that Kagame puts on, and they love it, because yes, we're all aware of how unpleasant and debasing and demeaning the colonial experience was. They love it, and then they convince themselves, because they're fed up with their own government, they're fed up with the corruption coming out of in the newspapers that they read at home. They think what we need is someone like that here, and I have seen that so often on Twitter or in letters written to newspapers. Africans saying, or ministers saying, Ghanaian government pastor or South Africa's finance minister saying, this is what we need here. And you sort of think, yeah, what you need, that's really what you need in your country. Be careful what you wish for. Be careful. Do you really want to have that human rights record? Do you really want to have elections that are rigged to 99% each time they're staged, supposedly voting for the president? Do you really want your heads of opposition to disappear or be found dead by the side of the road? Do you really want your journalists to go into exile? But you see this knee-jerk reaction because Kagame tells some Western journalists or some arrogant Western politician that he doesn't, who are you to lecture us? And it's very, very gratifying. And then you have this myth of the benign dictator. And the fact is, there is no such thing as a benign dictator. There is a dictator. It's never benign. It is not benign. So we have to accept that as a principle. I did want to talk about the role of social media. I thought David's experience was absolutely fascinating. I have been, since I published Do Not Disturb, I have seen my reputation, my looks, my gender, my track record, all absolutely trashed on Twitter, repeatedly, there are certain established bloggers who pretend to be independent commentators in Rwanda. They're not independent at all. They're on the government payroll. But you also see ordinary Rwandans supposedly wading in. And the fact is, you can see they're always using the same tropes, the same language, the same smears. And so it's not independent Rwandans. It is military intelligence. And in fact, the Rwandans actually run courses in which they teach youngsters who are keen to demonstrate their loyalty to the regime. They're teaching young members of the ruling party, RPF in Kotanyi, they're teaching them how to use social media to take on the enemies of the state. That would be people like me and people like David. And they do it systematically. I've never seen a government in Africa do it as well, as thoroughly, as relentlessly as the Rwandans do. And the other things that the Rwandans do brilliantly is they co-opt the African press, the African media scene is heavily co-opted, often in ways that are not immediately obvious to people. But I would challenge anyone, for example, to read the East African newspaper, or in fact, most of the Nation group in Kenya. Charles will probably have some views on this, and see how often they ever publish an article or a comment piece or letter that is critical of Kagame, or maybe just presents Rwanda in a slightly uncomplimentary light. In the case of the East African, it never happens, never. And the reason for that is because the Aga Khan, who we know owns that group, is looking to invest in Rwanda. And so he knows that the deal is, if you're going to get to invest in Rwanda, you must never ever criticize Paul Kagame. So this is a big media empire that on which millions of East Africans, Tanzania, Kenyans, Ugandans rely for their news about Rwanda, and they're getting censored news from the get-go. And there are many, many other newspapers and magazines and news websites that you can see that they either because their editors have been given that kind of trip that David just described, where they are taken to Kigali and they're wined and dine and stay in a beautiful hotel and have their jokes laughed at and come away thinking, oh my God, this place is amazing, or because there's actually some sort of financial incentive that they are basically acting as de facto propagandists for for Kagame. And it's very obvious to me because I've been able to see the way in which reviews of my book have been published, and I accept as a writer of a critical book that some people will give me bad reviews, but it's very interesting when you see very, very long reviews, 5,000 words, and then another review by the same person in the same newspaper, and then another one a couple of months later, again and again and again and again. And you used to think, why would any newspaper review a book 3 times? Why would that happen? And it's because, the editor has been told, this woman, she won't shut up on social media, let's get her, and get your journalist to write another negative review. So you can sort of spot the influence in Africa's media. And it's really, really sad because Africans and me, as someone who writes about Africa, rely on that media world to be independent and to be critical. And just the last thing I would like to say is I just wish that Western donors who give, as David was saying, I mean, Kigali is not Rwanda. There is glaring, appalling poverty, just as David so beautifully summarized, out in the countryside. Living standards are incredibly low, and what development there has been is often being funded by Western donors. And I just wish that they would spend, instead of going and listening to Kagame or a Rwandan ambassador or a Rwandan High Commissioner or a Rwandan Development Finance Minister, that they would spend some time on Twitter, because this is where you see the real face of Kagame. This is a man who's trained in military intelligence, That's what he was. As a young man, even before he was leading the RPF, he learned to do military intelligence in Uganda, working for Yoweri Museveni in the national resistance movement. And he knows how to use intelligence, to use the media, and to destroy reputations. And it's always personalized. It is ugly. It is brutal. It is about destroying people, never engage with the issues. For example, with my book, it's always been very important never to engage with the fact that I'm talking about an entire campaign of transnational repression being conducted by the government, which is sending out agents to kill dissidents, human rights activists and journalists all around the world. So instead, I get attacked just as David has been attacked. And I just wish that the ambassadors, the Western ambassadors who are sitting in Kigali would spend some time on Twitter, because it would only take a couple of hours and you would see that this beautiful gleaming city and this suave, slick presentation, this suave, slick president, this is the ugly face. This is when you see the brutality, the appetite for violence, the disrespect, incredibly misogynist, in my case, incredibly misogynistic, sexist accusations. This is where you see the racism as well. I just wish, please, could the donors actually stay on Twitter for a couple of days, and they would come out feeling, they would look at the regime in a very, very different light.
Thank you very much. You have touched a lot of things that we might come to it at the end of our session, especially around the transnational repression that you have basically touched in your book. But let's go back to Mr. Charles. Mr. Charles, we haven't had time to basically listen to your experiences as well as a journalist. Given that you live in East Africa, have you ever had any sort of threats or sort of contacts from the Rwandan government threatening you about your views on Rwanda?
Well, I think, just like Ms. Wong has just said, it's very hard to write anything about Rwanda. I'll tell you about my experience with the East African newspaper. I went to see the managing editor, and I was working on a piece that was fixated on what is happening there. And apparently, I just said I want to do about 1,000 words, and I'll provide it to them. And the ME decided to take me round and round and round, and the article was never published until when I met the regional head of the it's called Human Commission, something. I'm forgetting the name, the international organization. And they told me, look, Charles, you're wasting your time. There's no newspaper in East Africa that can critique the government in Rwanda. You're wasting your time. And I sat down and I asked myself, is that true? So I started looking through the newspapers. You can critique Yoweri Museveni, you can critique Uhuru Kenyatta in Kenya, you can critique what is happening until he died, what was happening in Tanzania. But very difficult, you get any newspaper in this region that is actually doing any critique on Rwanda. So it's very unlikely to get a journalist in Kenya getting threats or that kind of thing. It's very difficult to write about Rwanda. It's very hard. In fact, when I write about Rwanda, the only news platform that accepts, my pitch is this one called Towards Freedom. Towards Freedom will actually take a very objective piece, and they always tell me, be careful the people you talk to, because apparently even when in Rwanda, don't forget Rwanda has embraced the Israeli way of getting onto the telephone. So anybody who's talking in Rwanda is always fear. They always fear. So Rwanda is more of a police state, and that's why I told you from the initial day, from the initial stuff, that Rwanda is a unique country. Just like David said, Kagame is a master PR master. You can't beat him. It's good that you brought up the issue that he creates the impression of an Africanist. And the more I read about him, what I find very worrying is that the Western world loves this man. There's an article that actually ran in the New York Times, and there's an envoy who was the source. And what he said is why they like this man is because when the donors give him money, Kagame somehow uses it well. They give money for this, and you find the street has the lights. You do this event, and they said we'd rather have a man like that one than say what we have in my own country in Kenya, whereby the money that we get, because that's our biggest problem, is eaten away in corruption. But if you look at what Kagame is doing, he has this thing about Kigali. Kigali looks like it's a very different sort of state, but like you rightly said, if you look in the rural areas, 90% of the people, it's poverty. But you see, the people who go to Rwanda never get to go to those other areas, so they never get to know how Rwanda, how poor it is. But this fellow called Kagame is a masterpiece PR man. You can't beat him. And that's why I told you from a while ago, myself and the other Kenyans here, if you're trying, nobody writes about Rwanda unless you have 2 or 3, 4 people who are willing to talk in Rwanda to tell you what is happening there. Because you cannot critique Rwanda while you're in Rwanda. And when you're in this part of the world, you fear that probably you might be the next target. Because like you rightly know, this guy has ways of getting you being shot. You could be in Rwanda, you could be in South Africa, you could be wherever it is. You're likely to be a target. So what I think is, and that's what I said from the word go, the way we can sort out the Rwanda issue is if we build a very serious civil society in Rwanda. For me, that is the way I see a way out, because like Michelle has said, you find that the Francophone countries are slowly coming out and moving away because they feel that France mistreated them, and they feel now it's time to have a big say, and therefore you find Rwanda in the meantime, France in the meantime is trying to appeal to them, say, hey, look, we can behave, we can do business. In the meantime, we have the British. The British are losing out from the Chinese, like I say, and they don't want to lose everybody else. So what they say is, we have this one who wants to be part of us, let us try and cuddle with them. So regional politics, regional global politics also come into play. And therefore you find that sometimes, and it's very unfortunate, the locals in Rwanda are left on all by themselves. But the beauty is that we have in this sort of engagement, probably they'll battle on and they become better voices, and probably we'll be able to get to, our voices will get to somebody or some organization that has a voice that can sit on the same table with the Blairs of this world. Because the Blairs of this world are the Emirs of Africa. But the Blairs of this world are the same people who are creating this mega state that is creating poverty in that country, killing people. The blood is in the hands of Tony Blair. And the other Westerners who actually get money from Kagame, because Kagame can buy you whatever you want, Kagame will give you. If you're a journalist and you want a new car, you'll get it. If you look at what happens in Twitter and what happens in social media, if you write a bad story about Rwanda, before you know it, you get about 10 people, you don't even know their names, writing down there, and whatever they're writing about becomes so personal. They say, you don't know what happened in Rwanda. You forget that there was a genocide. So this residue sense of that the rest of the world abandoned Rwanda. This man called Kagame rides on it, and we feel that truly probably he has something, he's talking the truth. Because apparently, when the kids were being killed, nobody actually participated. And therefore, there's a sense of guilt. So you can't really get in there and say, look, stop doing this. But a time is coming, and the time has come when he needs to be called out. But unfortunately, the hypocrisy that we find with these so-called Commonwealth organizations impedes any sort of change that you and I would like to see in Rwanda. So unless the people in Rwanda themselves, and that's what I say, unless the world looks at Rwanda and says, look, if we don't get into that place, we don't put boots in that place, the people are going to kill themselves. I'm not saying you kill yourselves, but I'm saying raise up your voices as Rwandans. Talk, because it looks like it's one for all and one for. It's not one for all. You're not like the Musketeers. What happens like now? Paul was picked up from, I think, some country. He was brought into this particular country. He's rotting in jail. All we do is just talk. It's like a talk show. I think what we need is to have a very formidable force within Rwanda itself. Make a lot of noise. That's what happened in Kenya here. Daniel Arap was crazy. He was a terrible man. People disappeared. But what happened is that the civil society in this particular place actually was actually what steered change to happen. And because of the pain, because of the suffering of the people. So if you do not have a civil society that is taking on the government, Believe me, we'll be reduced to having these conferences here, day in and out.
Thank you, Charles. Just as we wrap up our segment here.
Background.
Sure. Thank you. As we finish this section, I would ask one quick question, if you can be brief, and also the rest of the panelists, if they can be brief. So, Mr. Charles, Rwanda is a member of the Commonwealth. Rwanda is a member of the Eastern African Community. Rwanda is a member of the Great Lakes region. At the moment, we're having a lot of conflicts between Rwanda and DRC, and we have had conflicts with Rwanda and Burundi. Now we're hosting the Heads of Commonwealth Summit in Kigali. What does all of this information we have means for the Eastern African community and the East African people?
Well, that's a very good question. What I'll tell you is that the East African region is not in a good place, because I'll give you a very practical example. If you look at what has just happened in Tanzania, for example, where the Maasais have been kicked out of their ancestral land, yet the courts, the East African court had actually had a stay and said, look, nothing should happen to those people. But the government in Tanzania kind of rubbished what the courts have to say. So what I'm trying to say is that within East Africa, the rule of law, insofar as the leadership of the continent of the region is concerned, does not exist. But I can tell you, we're lucky. Like I say, in Kenya, I think we're a bit lucky. Our courts have become emboldened. I mean, I think we are special people. I think for the very first time, we had the election of the President Council. That's a big milestone. It shows that our judicial system is becoming powerful. But within the region, Rwanda has taught the leadership that term periods are not necessary, so you can become a president for 10 terms if you want. And so long, and then what happens is that the Western world doesn't care, because don't forget, Rwanda is the only country that makes smartphones. Rwanda, in terms of women, it has a bigger representative in terms of members of parliament. Rwanda, again, in terms of economic growth, as far as the World Bank is concerned, is going at 7%. So when the Western world looks at this, they think Rwanda is a good place, so to speak. These variables have, in many ways, made Rwanda what it is today, in terms of all the voices are still. There's no that voice that can speak and can be heard. Because people will ask, why are you making noise? You guys are doing so well. Because in my country, for example, we're trying to pass a two-part for gender. Rwanda has surpassed that. In fact, it has surpassed the entire British, the European world. So what mistake is Rwanda doing? And that's a PR that this man called Kagame writes on. So when you ask me what we can learn in East Africa, there's nothing like East Africa. Kagame is East Africa in his head, and he decides what goes on. He's a small country, but you realize that everybody listens to what he has to say, because the guy has bad manners. You know, you remember he went to DRC, has stolen in DRC. He's causing mayhem in Uganda as well. They're fighting, but thank God that the son of Museveni is trying to create some peace or something. I don't know what's going on in there, but you realize that these countries are more are ruled by the same people. They have the same interests. So I'm sorry to say this, but the Commonwealth leaders are hypocrites. And I don't think that much, apart from trying to satirize the poor leadership, the pathetic leadership of Kagame, I don't think much is going to come out of that meeting. That's my take.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you for your time. I'll quickly go to Ms. Rong as we finish. In your book, you spoke about the transnational repression. And we have spoken about a lot of things that are being done in Rwanda that the government, the British government knows. What would you like to say, or what would you say to the British government and also to the taxpayers in Britain who are funding these trips of the politician delegates to go to Kigali?
Well, you know, I would have intervened and had a conversation with Baroness Scotland if I was working for the British government and said, do you really think it's an appropriate place to stage a venue there? And instead they've been falling over themselves. So, you know, I think the Brits could do an awful lot more And the trouble is that now we have this refugee asylum processing deal. So the British are not going to be putting any pressure on Rwanda on the human rights front or on any front. And it is it's a very unpopular deal here with about half the population. There are people within Boris Johnson's government who also have an issue with it. So I think as long as that policy remains in place, Britain will be incredibly hypocritical on Rwanda, and it will ignore its human rights record and ignore its destabilization of the region. But there is no saying that Boris Johnson will be in power for more than, he's having to be extremely vulnerable now, having had a vote of no confidence, which no leader wants to have to go through. So things could change very, very quickly here in the UK. And the first thing that Labour would do if it came into power would be to get rid of that policy. And then the whole relationship with Rwanda would change.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I really appreciate. We'll move really fast to Mr. David. Mr. David, you have mentioned that you lived under dictatorship. And I would assume that you have a really good understanding of how living under dictatorship feels. What would you like to say to the young Africans that looks up to Kagame as the new Kwame Nkrumah or the new Nelson Mandela?
What I'd mention is that Kwame Nkrumah and Nelson Mandela were both democratically elected heads of state. They didn't just happen. And in at least in Nelson Mandela's case, he stepped aside. He was constitutionally entitled to run for another term in office. He chose to step aside. So these people that you look up to, the reason you look up to them is because they make choices to do things the right way. And I hate criticizing Kwame Nkrumah, but the truth is, toward the end, he himself had this sort of Kagame light moment, and that led to him ended up the way he ended up. So there's a reason why dictatorship statistically doesn't work in Africa. So if you were to go through a list of African heads of state from the independence era to date, and you were to categorize them by who is democratic and who was the dictator, and then look at the success rate, it's very clear that there's a huge disparity in favor of dictatorship and failure at the same time. There's a reason for every quote unquote benevolent dictator, even though there's really no such a thing, but people like to reference people like Thomas Sankara, which is dubious. But for every Sankara you get 5 Bokasas and Idi Amins and Kamuzu Bandas and all those kinds of people. We have them in excess in African history, and because the population of Africa is statistically so young, I feel like a lot of us genuinely have no idea what it meant to live under these people, which is why these narratives that are being heavily sponsored by people like Kagame, like I know some of the PR agencies that he uses. I could mention names even, but it probably wouldn't be a good idea to do that. I know some of the PR agencies he uses to push these narratives, and they get paid serious money to do this. A single article that might get placed, maybe the Washington Post or whatever, gets the writer gets paid $10,000. And I know this because I've been offered such a gig before. That's how it works. Like, these things are very well funded. The reason that young Africans seem to have some kind of fondness for these narratives is because somebody is sponsoring these narratives. Somebody is paying people whose skill set is to push these ideas on you and make you think that it was your idea, that it came out of your head. It's not your idea. It's someone else's idea, serving someone else's interest that they have paid other people to implant in your head. So be very careful about what ideas that maybe you saw on TikTok or wherever. Be very careful about what you let into your head. It's not everything you see on the internet that you need to take at face value. There are people whose job is to act mind control on you if there is such a thing. So that's what I would say. Just coming from the point of view of someone who grew up in Nigeria under General Sani Abacha, where people used to disappear randomly. Like, it was like, I have that experience. Even though I was a child then, the feeling of terror, I cannot forget it. And it's not something that anyone should have to go through again.
Thank you very much, David. As they say, not everything that glitters is gold. I think that will really wrap up our session. I'll thank you all for your time. I'll pass back the microphone to our coordinator, Mr. Fred, if he's in the studio. Mr. Fred, thank you. Thank you, people, for your time.
Thank you very much, Chancellor, for your work here, and thank you to all the panelists. But before you go away, I really do have to follow up a follow-up question to Charles. Charles, as a Kenyan, you live in East Africa, so you just told us some things about Rwanda being part of East Africa. But I'm asking myself a question. Yes, the Commonwealth leaders, is we see it, there are hypocrites, as you said in your words. But how about the East African leaders? I mean, Rwanda has been a member of the Commonwealth since 2009, just joining Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, who have been there. We have seen, sometimes President Kagame, hand in hand with President Jomo Kenyatta, Uhuru Kenyatta, sorry, and then also with Museveni some times ago. And as you remember, a few years ago, he even, intimidated one of Tanzania's president. So what do you see that the leaders in East Africa can do to help, in Rwanda, in situations that we are seeing now of, abuse of power, because you don't see much of those leaders coming from them?
Freddie, what do I need to tell you, my brother? The answer is nothing, because look at it this way. If you look at Uganda, they have issues. If you look at Tanzania, like I told you, as recent as last week, again, the president there has caused mayhem, trying to kick out a community from the piece of land. So East Africa is a troubled region. We cannot have, there's no leader who can actually take the model line, the straight line. I think they are all the same. Nobody wants to point fingers on the other person and say, look, I think we are winning. And then number three, I think right now, the concentration of politics in terms of regional, it's not something that is highly appreciated by the leadership. I think what is important is sustaining their leadership, theirs, not the people. And therefore, what happens, all the 3-4 leaders will do whatever it takes to maintain power. So in my opinion, I think it will be an imagination, to be imagining too much, to imagine that the East African region can sit down to discuss about Rwanda. Rwanda is actually a country that is respected because of your leader, of your president, that president down there. Not because it has anything to offer, but because whenever Kagame speaks, I think the rest of Africa feels they have a voice. Because he talks about, and that's the irony, he says things that somehow have traction with majority of the despondent youth. And don't forget, for example, Uganda has the youngest population on earth. Rwanda equally has a young population. They feel proud that they have a leader who can stand up to the British. They think it's a good thing, like David said. So this narrative has what we call traction with Africans, young, with a certain demography. Because again, a lot of them have never experienced freedom. They don't know what it means to lose freedom. And therefore, what happens is that when you tell them, there are people like in my country here, Kenya, they think Rwanda is better than this place. You can imagine. They think that what Rwanda is going to, how Rwanda is, particularly in the capital, Kigali, is a sign that Kigali is doing better than Kenya. Because the demography here in Kenya, the young youth, they do not know what trouble is. They just inherited a country where institutions are functioning, and they think this is the way life is. If you look at Rwanda in the meantime, you realize that the people there have this genocidal narrative that has been pumped into their heads. Because even when Kenyans go to Rwanda, when they come back, they're different people. They kind of fear. When they talk, they look behind their backs. They think somebody's listening to what they're talking about Rwanda. And they're not willing even to discuss what is happening in Rwanda. So I'm sorry to say that Rwanda is, and I'm sorry for the people who live in that country. Rwanda, for lack of a better word, is the next Eritrea. It's more like Eritrea. It's only that Eritrea doesn't have a lot of what we call good roles, to show like the one you have in Kigali. But the spirit of Eritrea is the same one that you have in Rwanda. The leadership in Rwanda and the guy in Eritrea are one of the same kind. So I think I'm a prayerful man. I'll pray for Rwanda, and I pray for Rwandans to come together. And but don't put a lot of hope in the East African leadership trying to create change in Rwanda. I think that is
okay.
Impossible.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And your input was very, very interesting and very important for the Rwandan population and the world and as a whole. So that being said, we had said that we'd had 3 panels today, but we have a 4th panel. We didn't talk about it because the people that have to be on the 4th panel are in Rwanda, and we didn't want to announce that before time. So we are being joined now by Victoire Ingabire. Victoire Ingabire from Kigali. Victoire Ingabire, are you there? Your microphone, please. Hello. Actually, Charles and Michael, you can you can leave the room because we are at the 4th panel, and I'll be discussing with Victoire, but you can still follow the discussions.
Victoria is actually a very good friend of mine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we talk a lot of that.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I will ask you to leave the room, Charles, so we can continue with Victoire.
Sure,
but
sure,
you can,
sure.
yeah, you can still follow the conference. Thank you. Okay, Victoire Ingabire, is she still there, or do we have any technical problems? Hello. Can you have Victoire connected, please? So it seems like we have a technical problem for now. We're going to be waiting for about 2 minutes. But we can say that we have been on this conference for at least over three hours. And from what we have heard from our panelists, from the first one to the third one, is that we still have a very long way to go. Rwanda being a Commonwealth member since 2009, all panels have agreed that nothing has been done for Rwanda to follow up on all the Commonwealth values, which include the promotion of democracy, human rights, good governance, the rule of law, individual liberty, egalitarianism, free trade, and also militarism and world peace. As you all follow, Rwanda is being criticized for being a country that does not give freedom of speech to the people in Rwanda or even the journalists that are abroad. So this is an issue that probably during the meeting, all the member states that will be gathering in Rwanda should probably bring on the table and discuss about the president of Rwanda, because Rwanda is being looked at as the next head of the Commonwealth. So we hope that all this meeting will do whatever they can do to convince President Kagame to change in that area. So as Victoire Ingabire is going to be there, or do we have a problem, technical problem? It seems like we still have connection problems with Rwanda. And I will remind also that on this last panel, we also had to have Mr. Bernard Ntaganda, who's in Kigali also, but because of connection issues, he could not either join us. So we're going to be waiting for about another 3 to 4 minutes, and we'll see if Victoire can connect. That being said, I remind the people that are following us that this conference has been organized by Rwandans' Rights and in collaboration with some other organizations like Jambo SBL, Radio Urumuri also. And I thank them for putting together this conversation, which is very important for the whole world, and especially Rwandans and the Commonwealth members, because we are looking at the Commonwealth as an organization that can help bring peace and also freedom in Rwanda. Still waiting to see if we can connect with Kigali, and we apologize for the delay. As we are still waiting for Victoire Ingabire to join us. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome, Victoire.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'm very happy that the connections could work for us now. So I will just introduce you to the followers here. And your name is Victoire Ingabire Umuhoza. You are speaking to us from Kigali, Rwanda. And I remind the people that are viewing us that you are president of Dalfa Umurinzi, a political party in Rwanda that stands for democracy and liberty for all. I'll also remind that Victoire Ingabire has returned to Rwanda in 2010, in January 2010, coming from the Netherlands, where he had spent actually more than 10 years of studying. And he returned to Rwanda for to pose his candidacy as a president in the presidential election for 2015. But as she had planned, the plan did not go as she planned, because they have decided to put her in jail on fabricated issues, and she spent 8 years in prison. I believe that's a resume of your life living now in Rwanda. And Victoire Ingabire, thank you for joining us today. And I do have a question for you, because Rwanda is now hosting the Commonwealth head of government meeting next week. And my first question for you is, as a woman politician living in Rwanda, and knowing that equality of gender is one of the core values of the Commonwealth, how do you see Rwanda going into that value? Do you see Rwanda as being representative of that value or not?
Rwanda, I appreciated the government of Rwanda, because it has taken measures to involve women in decision making. It has created a logo and the institutional framework, and it takes some steps to empower women. For example, Rwanda has the highest number of women parliamentarians in the world. But I don't agree with some people who confirmed that countries with a high score on civil rights and political liberties have high proportions of women in national legislatures than countries with low marks. And in my country, Rwanda, as I said, women outnumber men in the parliament, and the world and this my country, that gender equality is respected, but if you consult the Freedom House Index Report 2022, this report gives Rwanda a score of 22% in the terms of observing political and civil rights. The fact of the matter is that the high number of women parliamentarians has been not translated into laws that protect women. The law initiated by women parliamentarians in Rwanda are few. Women parliamentarians in Rwanda have boasted of having lobbied for the law against domestic violence, which is a self-serving law. But for example, there is a lack of interest in the initialing bill against the growing sex-based corruption in the labor market to get jobs and in high institution of learning where good marks are changed for sexual favor. I think you heard the case of Miss Rwanda, the problem there in this Miss Rwanda.
Yes. Yes.
Rarely have we heard women parliamentarians speaking out against violence against ordinary women by local officials. I don't know if you saw some bills where officials beating women. I
Yes, we saw
remember
that.
the case in the north of the country where the executive beated women with the man of DASO service. They beated a woman. It was in the period of COVID because she wanted to protect her brother. I strongly believe that really empowerment of women must manifest in their capacity to influence a policy and not to just rubber stamp the wishes of executives. What is the situation in our country today? It is honoring through their capacity to influence policies that they can participate in the political and the social transformation of a country. This, we have so many women in the parliament, but there's nothing changed in our society because they are, I can say that they are there only for the Rwanda public relations, that for the image of the Rwanda government.
Yes,
and you know that
excuse me to cut you off, but following up on what just told us, you know, we've seen so many times women being beaten by the police or some other security people in Rwanda, and as you said, there are so many women in the parliament, despite not influencing policy. Did any of those women at least raise a voice to say something or ask that those people can be charged and so on?
No, they did not. That is where is my concern, because we have so many women. But if we saw this bid where the security officers beating women on the street, never I heard a woman in parliament saying anything about it. That is why I say it, that I don't agree with that. People will say that if you have so many women in the parliament, this meaning that you are a democratic country. That is not true. And you know that the Commonwealth stresses that gender equality and women's empowerment are essential components of human development and the basic human right. Therefore, it is the duty of everyone, not just women, to fight any form of discrimination, because we have failed so far in an important component of our society. This is why I think that I ask not only women, but also men, that they have all to denounce and don't accept that there's a official security service of men beating women on street, and that everybody look at on that, but nobody do take any action against that. And in my humble opinion, the position of women in leadership should be empowering and not to be turned into a tool for political patronage. I think women must do more to educate their nation and to work together to have a critical mass necessary to get our voices heard. It is not enough to plead for our rights as women, but we must have self-belief in what the world takes us to be and capable of doing. That we have the capacity to build peaceful societies with full human potential and sustainable development. I believe that as women, we can. Yes, together we can, and let us start from the Commonwealth.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoire. That's very, very well said. And that being said, Victoire, you are in Kigali, and in less than a week, the Commonwealth meeting will be held there. My other question is, as a politician, have you been invited or not at all?
No, not. I was tried to be registered to participate in the Commonwealth Women Forum. They did not answer me, and I tried to be registered in the People Commonwealth Forum. They did not answer those. I will not participate in this forum.
But
and yesterday I saw that it is honoring me as a political, but I saw that also there are some journalists that we will not get accreditation to participate in these meetings.
So did you at least try to have the government of Rwanda register you, or you did not try that way?
No, not that way, because we received the format to fill in. Okay. Yes, for the registered. This is what this form I filled in, but I did not receive an answer.
Okay, so the Commonwealth has some values, as I stated before, and one of those are freedom of speech and democracy. And we know that Rwanda has been criticized of not being a democratic country. And what's your take on that? When you see you are in Rwanda, you've been fighting to get registered, and how do you see democracy or freedom of speech improving in Rwanda? Is there any improvement at all, or so much has to be done?
Mm-hmm. If you talk about democracy, the Rwanda government claims to be practicing a consensual democracy that aims to prevent further ethnic violence while accelerating development. However, this consensual democracy has transformed over time into a system that suppresses political dissent, restricts pluralism, and cap civil liberty in Rwanda. As a result, political elections are always characterized by limited choice in Rwanda.
Okay.
I know that if we talk about election, many countries, it's not only in Rwanda. The dictatorial governments have limited democracy to holding regular elections just to satisfy aid donors who fear to be accused by their citizens of giving aid to autocratic regimes. Hey, I remember in 2010, after the election in Rwanda, that U.S. State Department issued a statement. I remember that they said that democracy is about more than holding elections. A democracy reflects the will of people, where minority voices are heard and respected, where opposition candidates run on the issues without threat or intimidation, where freedom of expression or freedom of press are protected. But in Rwanda, that is a big problem. I think that the U.S. State Department issued this statement after the election in 2010. When I tried to participate in this election, the government chose to put me in prison. And 7 years later, Diane Rwigara tried to participate in the election. She has the same problem as me, because she was put also in the prison. This, you can imagine a country that say we empower women, The women in the constitution, we have the constitution that all women have to be in all institution. But if you try to participate in presidential election, because we are only the two women of opposition, we tried to participate in the presidential election, but they put us in the government. Only women who work together with the ruling party, they are accepted. That is the problem. This is why I say the democracy and the gender equality, it is two values of Commonwealth that has to be respected in our country.
Okay, thank you very much. And also, I could probably add also individual liberty as being one of the values of the Commonwealth. As that being said, you know, individual liberty includes also, you know, as they say, individual liberty leads to the well-being of the people. Okay, so what we see now and what we have heard in the news, I mean, the government of Rwanda has even decided to close the schools in the period where you know, the Commonwealth meeting will be taken. So what do you think about that? Is that not a way for the government just to put people, to tell to people to stay home, the kids at home, and then even the members who will probably want to visit the schools and the people and will not have the way to go to see those things? How about that?
Yes, that is the other issues we had. It is one of the action taken by the government to close the schools, the time that the CHOGM meeting will be held in Kigali. It is only that there are also women that the government brought in the transit center, because they buy the fruits and the vegetable on the street. Yes, and now the government say, we don't want to see you on the street. You have to stay home. Or some of them they brought them in the Congo transit center or otherwise. I think that is not the country that you can say that they respect the liberty of movement, of liberty of expression. No, it is not. It is not, okay. Because if you see what they are doing, it is not really the country that you can say that should be the member of Commonwealth. I don't know if you remember that Rwanda was admitted as a member of Commonwealth in 2009. And in this time, the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative has indicated that Rwanda is not yet ready to be accepted into Commonwealth because of his system of governance, and that human rights is not respected in Rwanda. And now, 13 years after that, we have the same problem in our country. This is why I hope and count on the Commonwealth Ministerial Action Group to carry out its mission to access violation of Commonwealth value and to recommend measures to restore democracy and the constitutional rule. It will be equally necessary to do monitoring and evaluation of how many governments will implement Commonwealth values, particularly in empowering women and the democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, especially in our country. Because I don't see why the people in the countries, members of the Commonwealth, what they will provide to be the member of the Commonwealth if the Commonwealth cannot help these countries, the members of Commonwealth, to change the life of people in the countries member of Commonwealth.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoria. I would also remind that talking about the freedom of speech and liberty, I would remind our viewers that the government of Rwanda in the last few months, they have jailed many of the journalists that had some blogs or even publishing on YouTube because they were talking to everybody about the problems that people of Rwanda are living, and also criticizing some bad policies of the government. That being said, Victoire, you are in Rwanda. None nagira ngo nkubaze ikibazo mu Kinyarwanda kugira ngo abanyarwanda badukurikira bashobore kumva banasobanukirwe Commonwealth wenda values agaciro sinzi ukuntu navuga values mu Kinyarwanda indangagaciro zimwe nagira ngo ube wabwira abanyarwanda wagira icyo babwira ukurikije ko u Rwanda nk'igihugu cyemerewe kujya mu muryango wa Commonwealth kandi akaba ari indangagaciro zimwe ikomeyeho cyane nka demokarasi, uburenganzira bwa muntu, kuba equality of gender, sinzi kurwanya ubusumbane, uburinganire. Ndagira ngo ugire icyo wabivugaho kandi unatubwire nanone ukurikije uko ubibona, nk'uko nakubajije mu Cyongereza. Twumvise ko hari amashuri yafunzwe mu Rwanda kandi tuzi neza ko mu Rwanda bakora ibyo bashoboye byose kugira ngo berekane ko igihugu gikeye nta kibazo gihari, kandi tukaba dutekereza ko mu gihe nk'iki igihugu gisurwa, abantu baje mu nama batanga imfashanyo mu gihugu bagombye kugira umwanya wo kugira ngo bajye kureba abaturage kandi basure n'ayo mashuri barebe icyaba kibuze kugira ngo bashobore gufasha. Ibyo byose bitubwiraho iki mu magambo make mu Kinyarwanda? Urakoze.
Urakoze. Hari indangagaciro koko z'ingenzi za Commonwealth. Hari demokarasi, nabivuzeho mu kanya mvuga ko abantu benshi bavuze demokarasi bagira ngo ni amatora. Mvuga uburyo Leta Zunze Ubumwe za Amerika, Minisiteri y'Ububanyi n'Amahanga yavuze ko ntabwo demokarasi ari amatora gusa akorwa buri gihe, kuko ibyo ngibyo usanga n'abayobozi b'abanyagitugu ari byo bibandaho cyane, ahubwo bakasobanura ko amatora ni hahandi n'amajwi y'abatatowe n'abantu benshi agomba kumvwa, n'amajwi y'ibitekerezo bya buri wese bigomba kumvwa kandi bikubahwa. Umuntu ntazire kuba yagira ibitekerezo. Ntabwo demokarasi rero ari amatora gusa. Usanga rero kenshi bagira ngo demokarasi turatora buri gihe, iyo manda irangiye abantu baratora. Nagaragaje kandi ko icyo ni ikibazo cya demokarasi dufite mu Rwanda, akaba ari imwe mu mahame remezo mu by'ukuri u Rwanda uyu munsi rutubahiriza uko bikwiriye, kuko nagerageje kugaragaza ko n'ayo matora banavuga twagerageje kuyajyamo, yaba ari njyewe cyangwa ari Diane tugafungwa, ngaragaza yuko kenshi abadamu usibye bari ku ruhande rw'ubuyobozi bw'igihugu bw'ishyaka riri ku butegetsi, ariko batari ku ruhande rw'ubuyobozi bw'ishyaka riri ku butegetsi muri opposition, ko byabayeho kuri njye turongera tukagira ibyo bibazo byo gufungwa. Aha rero nkabihuza no kuvuga ahandi kuvuga ngo uburenganzira bw'abagore ko mu Rwanda cyashyize imbere guteza abadamu imbere. Ni byiza koko ndabishima, kuko muri constitution birimo ni amategeko yanditseho akavuga bati 30% abagore bagomba gutorwa mu nzego zose z'ubuyobozi bw'igihugu, ariko wabisesengura neza ugasanga abo badamu babaye nk'aho kugira ngo bibe ibintu byo gushyira mu nyandiko gusa, navuga nk'umutako ubaho ngaho gusa kugira ngo igihugu cyacu kivugwe neza ko gifite abadamu benshi muri parlement. Ariko ukabibaza se abo badamu batavugira nk'abagore bagenzi babo. Ntanga urugero rw'abantu twigeze kubona mu mudamu ko twaga na executive n'abadaso, abo bantu ntabwo nigeze numva abadamu nibura bahaguruka ngo bavuge bati biriya ntabwo dushaka kubibona, iryo jwi ryabo ryumvikane. Usanga abo bagore b'abazunguzayi bahutazwa n'abo bantu bo mu nzego za daso bakabahutaza. Ntabwo ndumva abadamu bo muri parlement bavuga bati dushyireho itegeko rihana rwose ku buryo bari abagore batazongera guhutazwa n'abo bantu bo muri izo nzego za daso. Ugasanga ntacyo babikoraho. Muri iyi minsi hari ibyo mwumvishe bya Miss Rwanda, mwumvishe ko hari abantu, njya na Perezida Kagame ubwo yaravuze avuga ati mu nzego zinyuranye narabimenye ko hari ruswa y'igitsina. Iyo ruswa y'igitsina irahari, ntivugwa. Abo badamu, kuba dufite abadamu benshi mu nteko ishinga amategeko, bagombye kuba aba mbere mu kuvuga bati ibyo bintu bigomba gucika. Rero urabona icyo kintu ayo mahama abiri ya demokarasi n'uburinganire mu by'ukuri akorwa, navuga ko mu Rwanda tuyakora mu buryo bw'igice. Niyo mpamvu nkunze kuvuga mu Rwanda tugomba kubaka igihugu kigendera ku mategeko. Naryo ni irindi hame ryo muri ry'uyu muryango wa Commonwealth ugenderaho, kuko niba twari dufite igihugu kigendera ku mategeko, amategeko yose dufite ari mu mpapuro nibura n'ahari yagombye kubahirizwa. Ba badamu batowe koko hakurikijwe uko byanditswe mu itegeko nshinga 30% mu nzego zose z'ubuyobozi, ariko bakabamo batagiye kwishushanya gusa nk'uko nyamva abajene bavuga, ahubwo bagiyemo koko gufata ibyemezo bya politike bigira icyo bimarira sosiyete, kuko ntabwo bihagije kugira abagore bari aho ngaho gusa. Navuze ko abagore turashoboye, ubushobozi turabufite, nitureke rero kujya mu nzego z'ubuyobozi ari ukwishushanya gusa, ariko ujyemo ufite icyo ushobora kumarira sosiyete. Ngira ngo no mu Kinyarwanda dufite umugani uvuga ngo ukurusha urugo, ukurusha umugore akurusha urugo. Nuko niba abagore bahari, nibona koko bakoresheje bwa bushobozi bafite, be kugenda gusa kuba inkoma mashyi.
Urakoze cyane Victoire. Ubwo ngubwo turagaruka mu Cyongereza kugira ngo nbaze ikibazo cyanjye cya nyuma hano. And yeah, so back to English right now. This is my last question to you. I mean, the meeting of the Commonwealth is approaching, and as we know, you are waiting for your party to be organized so you can do your political activity, without any problems. So do you think you'll get a chance probably to put in a word to those who are coming to the meeting so they can pressure at least the government of Rwanda to let you be recognized as a politician and recognize your Dalfa Umurinzi as a political party in the country?
I hope I will have the chance to present or to meet some delegation that will be in Rwanda, that I can present the problem of opposition in Rwanda. As you said, until today, my political party is not yet registered.
Yeah.
And the government cannot explain why. They cannot give me the authorization to act according to the constitution of Rwanda, because in the constitution, the constitution authorizes multipartyism in Rwanda, but I don't have an authorization to organize the first meeting for my political party. This, I think, if I will meet some delegates who will be in Rwanda, I will ask that there is also something we send our letters to them before they come in Rwanda, explain that the core values of Commonwealth are not respected in Rwanda, and that we ask them that in the meeting they will take a resolution asking the Rwanda government to respect all values of Commonwealth, and that to set up a mechanism that can follow how Rwanda will put in action the core value of the Commonwealth.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoire Ingabire, for being with us. At that word, we end our program of today. And I would like to take this time to thank everyone who participated. I would like also to thank the technicians behind the scenes and everybody who has contributed to this event. And I thank also very much to all those who have been following us, and remind you that this event had been organized by Rwandans Right in collaboration with Jambo SBR, Radio Urumuri, Radio Television Impinduka, and also Mouvement Idamanje. Thank you very much all for following, and stay tuned, because very soon we'll get back to you again. Thank you very much, and my name is Freddy Usabwera, and I was speaking to you from Canada. Thank you.